The year was 1873, and the wind along the New Mexico and Texas border did not merely blow, it scoured. It carried the red dust of the high plains into every seam of clothing, every crack in the timber, and every pore of exposed skin. It was a relentless, ancient force, much like the land itself, which seemed to tolerate the presence of men only with a grudging indifference. Down in the valley, where the earth flattened out into a deceptive invitation, the iron rails of the railroad were inching forward, day by day, a spine of steel being driven into the back of the Comanche buffalo grounds. Rowan Mercer stood on the wooden walkway outside the quartermaster's office at Fort Redemption, shielding her eyes against the glare. The fort sat like a blister on the landscape, a square of hewn logs and adobe walls erected against the vast, terrifying emptiness of the horizon. The name of the place was a cruel joke to anyone who had spent more than a week inside its walls. There was very little redeeming about the garrison. It was a holding pen for men who had forgotten how to be gentle, commanded by officers who had traded their souls for rank during the Great War between the states. At 26 years old, Rowan had learned that a woman alone in the West had two choices. She could find a husband to stand between her and the world, or she could become so indispensable that the world had to tolerate her. She had chosen the latter, though looking at the ink stains on her fingers, she sometimes wondered if she had made the harder bargain. She adjusted the heavy portfolio tucked under her arm. Inside were the latest sketches of the Southern Ridge, drawn with the precision that had been her father's legacy. Silas Mercer had been a scout, a man who could read the bend of a blade of grass as clearly as a preacher read the Bible. He had taught Rowan to see, really see, the rise and fall of the land, the way water cut through limestone, and how to translate 3 dimensions onto a flat sheet of parchment. He had taught her everything except how to survive the grief when the very land he loved swallowed him whole. Silas had died 4 years ago, killed in a skirmish on the Llano Estacado. The official report said it was a raiding party, Comanche. Since that day, the word itself Comanche had settled in Rowan's stomach like a stone that refused to digest. She had been raised on stories of their brutality, fed a steady diet of fear along with her corn pone and beans. To her, they were not men. They were the storm that had taken her father, the faceless shadow that haunted the edges of the map she was now paid to draw. She pushed the door open and stepped into the dim, stale air of the command building. The smell of tobacco smoke and old leather hit her instantly. "Miss Mercer," a corporal grunted from behind a desk, barely looking up from his ledger. He did not stand. The chivalry of the East died somewhere around the Mississippi River. "Colonel is expecting you." Rowan nodded, keeping her face impassive. She was the only woman living permanently within the walls of Fort Redemption, a fact that made her an object of intense curiosity and often thinly veiled disdain. To the soldiers, she was an anomaly. She wore practical calico dresses that were perpetually dusted with prairie grit. Her boots were scuffed, and she carried surveyor's tools instead of a parasol. She knew what they called her in the barracks the widow of geography. Though she had never been married, it was easier for them to dismiss her if they gave her a nickname that stripped away her femininity. She knocked on the heavy oak door at the end of the hall and heard a sharp command to enter. Colonel Harlan Briggs sat behind a desk that looked large enough to serve a banquet upon. He was a man of about 50 years, though the sun had leached the moisture from his skin, leaving him looking like a cured jerky. His most defining feature, however, was not his face, but the empty left sleeve of his uniform coat, pinned neatly to his chest. He had lost the arm at Shiloh, or perhaps Antietam. The story changed, depending on how much whiskey he had consumed, but the loss had not humbled him. If anything, it had distilled his ambition into something potent and corrosive. "Colonel Briggs," Rowan said, stepping forward but stopping before the desk. She did not curtsy. She unclasped her portfolio and laid it on the wood. "I have the preliminary elevations for the southern pass. The grade is steep, but the rail line can manage it if they cut into the limestone face." Briggs looked up, his eyes a pale, watery blue that lacked any warmth. He did not look at the map immediately. He looked at her, It was a look Rowan had grown accustomed to, a mixture of calculation and dismissal. He needed her skill, but he resented that it came packaged in a woman. Efficient as always. "Miss Mercer," Briggs said, his voice scratching like dry leaves. He reached out with his remaining hand, his fingers tracing the contour lines she had painstakingly inked. "You have a fine hand. Almost as good as your father's." "Better," Rowan corrected instinctively, then tightened her jaw. She did not need to defend her talent. The work spoke for itself. The water sources are marked in blue. They are seasonal. If the construction crews rely on them in August, they will die of thirst. Briggs chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Water is the least of our concerns. My dear, it is the current occupants of the valley that pose the threat to progress." He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the parade ground where a platoon was drilling in the midday heat. "Washington speaks of treaties," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "They send peace commissioners with their parchment and their wax seals, thinking they can negotiate with savages. They do not understand that civilization is not a negotiation. It is a conquest." Rowan felt a familiar chill. She shared his fear of the Comanche. Certainly, but Briggs spoke of them as one might speak of a wolf pack culling sheep. There was no hatred in his voice, only a cold, mechanical necessity. "I am just here to draw the land, Colonel," Rowan said quietly. "Politics is not in my contract." Briggs turned back to her, a thin smile stretching his lips. "In the West, Miss Mercer, everything is politics, even your maps. You define the borders. You tell us where the safe ground lies. Do not pretend you are merely an observer." He tapped the map with a calloused finger. "There is a delegation arriving next week. A final attempt, they call it, to convince the band to move to the reservation. They will need your maps, and they will need you." "Me?" Rowan frowned. "I am a cartographer, not a diplomat." "You are the daughter of Silas Mercer," Briggs countered. You know a smattering of their tongue, do you not? Your father insisted on it." "I know enough to trade for horses or ask for water," she said, her heart beating a little faster. "Not enough to negotiate a treaty." "It will suffice. And besides," Briggs's eyes narrowed, "it presents a softer image to have a woman present. It makes us look benevolent." Rowan stiffened. She was being used. She was a tool, no different than the compass in her pocket or the rifle on a soldier's saddle. But she held her tongue. Her goal was not to change the army. Her goal was to survive it. Every map she drew, every dollar she saved, brought her one step closer to the dream she kept hidden in a tin box under her cot. $300. That was the price of the plot of land near the Pecos River, close to a settlement that was just beginning to grow. She wanted to build a store there, a place that sold books and paper. She wanted to open a schoolroom in the back for the children of the immigrants who were flooding West German, Irish, Swedish. She wanted to teach them to read, to give them a world bigger than the dust and the struggle. She wanted peace and silence, and a life where the only thing she had to fear was a paper cut. "I will do what is required by my employment, Colonel," she said stiffly. "I am sure you will." Briggs dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Leave the maps. Close the door on your way out." Rowan walked back to her quarters, her boots crunching on the gravel. The fort was a hive of masculine energy shouts, the clang of the smithy, the stamp of horses. She kept her gaze forward, ignoring the whistles from a group of new recruits near the stables. She had learned to build a wall around herself, a barrier of icy professionalism that few dared to cross. But the isolation gnawed at her. At night, when the wind howled around the corners of her small cabin, the silence was loud enough to wake her. She missed her father. She missed the simple certainty of being loved. Here, she was useful, but she was not known. That evening, the mess hall was loud, filled with the smell of boiled beef and stale coffee. Rowan usually took her meal back to her room, but tonight the lamp oil in her cabin had run dry, and she was forced to eat in the corner of the main hall. She sat with her back to the wall, a book open beside her plate, trying to look invisible. 2 tables away, a group of veteran soldiers were hunched over their tin cups, their voices lowered to a conspiratorial rumble. Rowan tried to focus on her reading, but the name drifted over the clamor. Sharp and distinct. Tala Rook. She paused, her spoon hovering over her stew. She had heard the name before. It was a name that circulated through the fort like a ghost story, whispered by the sentries who stood watch on the walls at night. "I am telling you, it was him," a grizzled sergeant with a scarred cheek was saying. "I saw the markings on the arrows, black feathers, crow feathers." "He is just one man," a younger private scoffed, though he looked nervous. "You make him sound like a spirit." "He might as well be," the sergeant spat, taking a swig of coffee. "They call him Crow that walks at dawn. 3 years ago, he hit a supply train near the canyon, took the ammunition, took the horses, but left the food, left it right on the doorstep of that widow, Mrs. Gable, whose husband had died of the fever. You tell me what kind of savage does that?" "A smart one," another soldier muttered. "He buys loyalty with our rations." "He is dangerous," the sergeant insisted. "He is not like the old chiefs who are tired and want to sleep by the fire. This one. He is young, he is angry, and he knows this land better than we know the backs of our own hands. They say he can ride through a patch of dry leaves without making a sound." Rowan stared at the text in her book, but the words swam before her eyes. Crow that walks at dawn. It sounded romantic, almost poetic. But she knew better than to trust the poetry of the frontier. The Comanches were the enemy. They were the reason she had no father. This Tala Rook was likely just a bandit with a flair for the dramatic, a killer who had managed to build a reputation on fear. And yet, the description lingered in her mind. A warrior who stole from the army to feed a widow. It did not fit the terrifying caricature she had built in her head. It suggested a code of honor, however twisted. "He will be there," the sergeant continued, his voice dropping lower. "If the peace talks happen, he will be there watching, and mark my words, he won't be signing any paper that puts his people in a cage." Rowan closed her book. She had lost her appetite. She stood up, scraping her chair against the rough floorboards. The soldiers fell silent as she passed. She could feel their eyes on her back, assessing, judging. She walked out into the cool night air, taking a deep breath to clear the smell of the mess hall from her lungs. Above her, the stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the velvet sky like spilled diamonds. It was a beautiful, cruel land, and somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the walls, the man they called Tala Rook was waiting. 2 days later, a thick fog rolled in from the river, blanketing the valley in a spectral white. It was rare for the air to be this heavy, and it muffled the usual sounds of the fort, turning the world soft and indistinct. Rowan rose early, unable to sleep. She dressed quickly, throwing a wool shawl over her shoulders, and climbed the ladder to the sentry walk on the eastern wall. It was her favorite place to be at dawn. From here, she could usually see the sun break over the horizon, painting the clouds in violent shades of violet and orange. Today, however, there was no horizon. The world ended 50 yards from the wall, swallowed by the mist. She leaned her elbows on the rough timber of the parapet, enjoying the solitude. The sentry on duty was further down the wall, dozing on his feet. For a moment, she felt entirely alone in the universe. Then, the wind shifted, the mist swirled and parted, creating a sudden, clear tunnel of vision toward the ridge of hills that overlooked the fort. He was there. At first, Rowan thought she was looking at a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a rock. But the shadow moved. A horse, black as midnight, stood motionless on the crest of the hill, and upon it sat a rider. He was too far away to see his features clearly, but the silhouette was unmistakable. He did not sit like a soldier, stiff and upright. He sat with a fluid grace, as if he and the animal were carved from the same piece of stone. He wore no uniform. A long coat, perhaps made of buckskin, hung from his shoulders, and dark hair streamed loose in the damp wind. Rowan's breath caught in her throat. Her heart gave a singular, painful thump against her ribs. "Comanche!" a voice rasped beside her. She jumped, nearly dropping her shawl. The sentry had woken up and was standing next to her, his rifle raised, squinting into the fog. He spat a stream of tobacco juice over the wall. "Scouting us," the soldier muttered. "Bold devil, standing right there in the open." "Is it?" Rowan started to ask, but the name stuck in her throat. "Might be him," the soldier said, answering the unspoken question. "Might be the crow." Rowan looked back at the ridge. The rider had not moved, despite the soldier raising his weapon. He seemed completely unconcerned by the threat of the fort, as if he knew the distance was too great for a bullet to find him. Then, slowly, the rider turned his head. Rowan knew it was impossible. The distance was hundreds of yards. There was mist and shadow between them. But in that moment, she felt a physical sensation, like a static shock, snap along her spine. She felt, with absolute certainty, that he was looking directly at her. He was not looking at the cannons. He was not looking at the flag. He was looking at the woman in the gray dress standing on the wall. The gaze felt heavy, tangible. It was not the leering look of the soldiers, nor the calculating look of Briggs. It was a cold, primal assessment. It felt like being spotted by a mountain lion while walking unarmed in the woods, a recognition of predator and prey. Or perhaps simply of two living things existing in the same dangerous space. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend. Rowan could not look away. She felt stripped bare, her defenses useless against that dark, distant scrutiny. Then, the mist rolled back in, closing the tunnel of vision as quickly as it had opened. The rider and the black horse vanished into the white void. Rowan let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Her hands were gripping the wooden railing so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Did you see that?" the soldier asked, lowering his rifle. "Disappeared like smoke. I tell you, Miss Mercer, they aren't natural." Rowan pulled her shawl tighter around herself, shivering though the morning was not particularly cold. "They are men, private," she said, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. "Just men." But as she climbed down the ladder and returned to the safety of the ground, she could still feel the weight of that gaze on her skin. It was a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The atmosphere in the fort tightened in the days that followed. The Peace Commission arrived 3 men in dusty suits from Washington, accompanied by a heavy escort of cavalry. They brought with them crates of gifts, blankets, beads, mirrors, and tobacco. They also brought the treaty, a document dense with legal language that effectively signed away the Comanche's right to exist in the valley. Colonel Briggs was in high spirits. The railroad surveyors were pushing hard to cross the river. He needed the Indian problem settled before the first locomotive whistle shrieked through the canyon. Rowan found herself summoned to the command tent once again. The map she had drawn the detailed topography of the valley, the sacred hunting grounds, the water sources was spread out on the table. Briggs stood over it, flanked by the Washington men and a man Rowan had not met before. He was a civilian scout, a rough-looking character with grease in his beard and eyes that darted around the room like trapped rats. "Miss Mercer," Briggs said, his tone jovial but his eyes hard. "We were just discussing the route for the delegation. You have marked the canyon entrance here." "Yes." "Yes, Colonel," Rowan said. "That is the main trail. But during the rains, it floods. There is a higher path along the rim." "Excellent." Briggs nodded to the civilian scout. "You hear that? Maddox, the high path." Rowan felt a prickle of unease. Why would the peace delegation need the high path? It was narrow, difficult for wagons, and offered a strategic vantage point for shooting down into the canyon floor. It was a path for ambush, not for diplomacy. "Colonel," Rowan ventured, "if the wagons are heavy with gifts, the canyon floor is the only viable route." "We are just considering all contingencies." "Miss Mercer," Briggs said smoothly, "security is paramount. We cannot have our esteemed guests from Washington walking into a trap." He looked at her then, and for the first time, Rowan saw the full extent of his deception. He was not planning a peace mission. He was planning a maneuver, and he was using her knowledge, her father's legacy, to construct it. "You will ride with us tomorrow," Briggs stated. It was not a request. We meet the Comanche at Split Rock at noon. You will ride near the front. If there are words we do not understand, you will translate. I told you, my vocabulary is limited, Rowan protested, panic rising in her chest. You are there to show them that we trust them, Briggs said, stepping closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. They will see a woman, a mapmaker, a civilian. They will think we are harmless. Do not disappoint me. Rowan, your future in this territory, your little bookstore. Yes, I know about that depends on the Army's goodwill. Rowan went cold. He knew. He had probably read her mail. Or had someone go through her things. She looked around the room. The men from Washington were busy lighting cigars, indifferent to the tension. Maddox, the scout, was cleaning his fingernails with a knife. There was no help here. I will be ready, she whispered. Good. Briggs smiled. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we will make history. Rowan walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. The red dust swirled around her boots. She looked toward the distant hills, where she had seen the rider in the mist. She had thought she was merely an observer, a woman with a pen and a compass, documenting the changing world. She was wrong. She was the bait. The two worlds, the iron-willed expansion of the fort and the fierce, dying freedom of the Comanche, were about to collide, and she was standing directly at the point of impact. As the sun began to set, casting long, blood-red shadows across the parade ground, Rowan returned to her cabin. She packed her saddlebags. She sharpened her pencils. She checked the small revolver she kept in her drawer, though she prayed she would not have to use it. Outside, the wind picked up, howling like a mourning woman. It whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of sage and impending rain. Somewhere out there, Crow that walks at dawn was waiting. And tomorrow, Rowan Mercer would look him in the eye, not from a fortress wall, but from the precarious ground of a lie she hadn't told, but was forced to live. The morning sun sliced through the dusty window pane of the command office, illuminating the floating motes of grit that seemed to constitute the very atmosphere of Fort Redemption. Colonel Harlan Briggs sat behind his desk, his singular hand resting atop a sheaf of papers with the heavy stillness of a paperweight. Rowan stood before him, her spine stiffened by a mixture of exhaustion and indignation. She had been summoned before breakfast, and the taste of stale coffee was still bitter on her tongue. "Read it again, Miss Mercer," Briggs said, his voice smooth and dry, like sand sliding over stone. He tapped a paragraph near the bottom of the document with his index finger. Rowan did not need to read it. She knew the contract. She had signed it 3 months ago in St. Louis, believing it was her ticket to independence. "I know what it says. Colonel, I am to survey the topography for the proposed rail line and provide detailed cartography of the river basin." "And the clause below that?" Briggs pressed, his pale blue eyes unblinking. Rowan looked down, though she could recite the words from memory. "The signatory agrees to provide auxiliary support for any and all operations deemed essential to the security of the survey mission." It was standard boilerplate language, or so she had thought. Legal padding to ensure she didn't refuse to boil water or mend a tent if the situation became dire. "Auxiliary support," Rowan said, keeping her voice steady. "That implies camp duties. Colonel, perhaps cooking. It does not imply translation for a diplomatic envoy. The West does not care about your job title." "Miss Mercer," Briggs said, leaning back. The leather of his chair creaked, a sound like a gun holster being tightened. "We are short on men who speak the tongue without spitting blood. Your father was Silas Mercer. He spent more time in the lodges of the Comanche than he did in a church. You learned from him." "I learned enough to survive," Rowan countered. "I am not a translator. I came here to draw, and you shall draw." Briggs smiled, though the expression did not reach his eyes. "You will draw the approach to the valley while we ride, but when we stand before the chief, you will be my voice. You will tell them that the great father in Washington wishes for peace. You will help us secure the safety of the railroad." He stood up, walking to the map pinned to the wall. Her map. This is not a request. Rowan, it is an order. If you refuse, you are in breach of contract. You will forfeit your wages, and I will have you escorted to the nearest stagecoach stop without a penny to your name. I imagine that the plot of land you wish to buy will remain just a dream. Rowan felt the trap snap shut. $300. That was the sum of her freedom. Without it, she was just another destitute woman in a territory that devoured the weak. She swallowed her pride, the taste sharper than the coffee. I will ride with you, she said softly. But I will translate only what is said. I will not lie for you. Briggs chuckled, turning to look out the window. My dear, in war, the truth is just another weapon. You use it when it serves you, and you holster it when it does not. The column rode out 2 days later. It was a spectacle of calculated force. 50 cavalrymen in blue wool uniforms, buttons polished to a shine that rivaled the sun, flanked 2 wagons laden with gifts. Briggs rode at the head, his posture rigid, trying to project the image of a benevolent conqueror. Rowan rode near the center, mounted on a roan mare the army had provided. The heat was oppressive. The air shimmered off the hard pan, distorting the horizon until the distant mesas looked like floating islands. As the hours wore on, the silence of the officers gave way to the murmuring of the enlisted men. Sound carried strangely in the open air, and Rowan, with her hat pulled low, became invisible to them. Peace mission, a private scoffed, shifting in his saddle. Look at the ammo crates in the second wagon. Since when do we bring 300 rounds of carbine ammunition to a handshake? It is just insurance, another soldier replied, though he sounded unconvinced. Briggs wants that valley cleared. The railroad investors are screaming about the delays. He will not get them to move with blankets and tobacco, the first voice muttered. This is a scouting run. We are marking the targets. Once the ink is dry on whatever paper they sign, the cannons will roll up. Just watch. Rowan gripped her reins tighter. She had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud turned her stomach. She was not just a translator. She was a participant in a deception. Miss Mercer, a gruff voice broke her concentration. She turned to see Sergeant Martinez riding alongside her. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of scars and sun wrinkles, his mustache thick and gray. He had been kind to her in small ways since she arrived finding her extra firewood, warning her away from the rowdier barracks. Sergeant, she acknowledged. Martinez looked straight ahead, his expression grim. Keep your head down when we get there, and keep your ears open. The colonel speaks of peace, but he loads his pistol with hollow points. Why tell me this? Rowan asked, keeping her voice low. Because you have your father's eyes, Martinez said, finally glancing at her. Silas was a good man. He respected the land. I would hate to see his daughter become a casualty of a rich man's war. Do not trust everything Briggs calls peace, and do not trust that the Comanche will not see through it. They camped that night at the mouth of the canyon, a place where the wind whistled through the red rocks like a dying breath. The tension in the camp was palpable. Sentries were doubled. Men slept with their rifles cradled in their arms, restless. Rowan walked to the edge of the light, ostensibly to check on her mare. She passed the command tent, where the canvas flap was tied shut against the wind. Inside, a lantern burned bright, casting the shadows of men against the fabric like a puppet show. She heard Briggs' voice, sharp and agitated. The grade is too steep on the northern ridge, he was saying. We need the valley floor. The engineers were clear. The Comanche will never give up the floor, a second voice replied. It was the railroad representative, a man named Mr. Thornton, who smelled of bay rum and money. It is their winter camp. They will give it up if they are not there, Briggs said. The shadow on the canvas moved, pointing at something on the table. Look here. Mercer's girl drew it perfectly. This bottleneck at the east end. If we position the howitzers here and here, we can seal them in. We sign the treaty tomorrow to lower their guard. We will mobilize the heavy guns next week. By the time they realize the treaty is worthless, the rail ties will be laid over their ashes. Rowan froze. Through a gap in the tent flap, she saw a sliver of the interior. Her map was spread across the field desk. A thick red grease pencil had marked a violent cross over the very heart of the valley, the place she had labeled encampment. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had drawn the map to guide travelers, to document the beauty of the frontier. Now, it was a murder weapon. She wanted to run. She wanted to mount her horse and ride back to the fort, or perhaps just ride until the world ended. But there was nowhere to go. The desert was vast and indifferent, and she was alone. The next day, under the high noon sun, the two worlds collided. The meeting place was a flat expanse of hard-packed earth beneath the shadow of a towering split rock. The army formed a line, rigid and blue. Opposite them, emerging from the heat haze like spirits taking form, came the Comanche. There were perhaps 20 of them. They did not march in rows. They rode with a fluid unity, their ponies painted with symbols of speed and protection. At the center rode a man who commanded the air around him. Rowan felt the breath leave her lungs. It was the rider from the mist, Tala Rook. Up close, he was even more imposing. He wore leggings of soft buckskin and a vest adorned with intricate beadwork, but his chest was bare, revealing a landscape of scars that mapped a life of violence. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, with a single feather tied near the temple. But it was his face that held her. High cheekbones that looked carved from granite, a mouth set in a firm line, and eyes dark, intelligent, and utterly unyielding. As Briggs rode forward, flanked by his officers, Rowan gestured to follow. She urged her mare forward, feeling impossibly small between the two forces. Tala Rook brought his horse to a halt 10 paces away. He looked at Briggs with cold indifference. Then his gaze slid to Rowan, for the second time. That electric shock jolted her spine. His eyes widened. Just a fraction. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, swift as a bird's shadow. It was a look of confusion, perhaps, or a memory surfacing from deep water. He looked at her not as a soldier, not as an enemy, but as if he were trying to place a melody he had heard long ago. "Tell him," Briggs muttered to Rowan, breaking the spell. "Tell him we come to speak of the future." Rowan cleared her throat. Her mouth was dry as dust. She spoke the words in the Comanche tongue, haltingly, the sound strange and heavy on her lips. "The Bluecoats wish to speak of tomorrow." Tala's gaze snapped back to Briggs. He spoke in his own language, his voice a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate in the ground. "Tell the one-armed chief," Tala said, looking only at Rowan, "that tomorrow is not his to give. The sun rises for all." Rowan translated. Briggs bristled, his hand twitching near his saber. "Tell him," Briggs growled, "that the Iron Road is coming. It cannot be stopped. We offer them protection. We offer them food and blankets if they move to the reservation south of the Red River. If they stay, we cannot guarantee their safety from the progress of the world." The negotiation dragged on for an hour. It was a farce. Rowan translated Briggs' flowery lies about brotherhood and safety. Knowing that the Red Cross was waiting on the map back in the tent, she translated Tala's calm, steadfast refusals. The Comanche wanted peace. Yes, but they would not trade their freedom for it. They offered to share the hunting rights, to let the wagons pass, but they would not leave the valley of their ancestors. "He is stubborn," Briggs spat, wiping sweat from his brow. "He thinks he has a choice." "He is proud," Rowan corrected softly. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The soldiers behind them were restless, hands hovering near triggers. The warriors opposite were still as statues, but their bows were unstrung, a sign of parley that seemed increasingly fragile. Then, the calm shattered. A young lieutenant, flushed with heat and the flask of whiskey he had been nursing since dawn, laughed loudly at something a comrade whispered. He spurred his horse forward a few steps, leering at the Comanche line. "Why are we talking to these dogs?" the lieutenant slurred. He pointed a gloved finger at Rowan. "We are wasting time. Hey, Chief, you want to trade, you give us the land, and we give you the girl. She draws pretty pictures. Maybe she can draw you a map to hell." Silence descended like a hammer, Rowan went cold. She turned to look at Briggs, expecting a reprimand, a shout of order. Instead, she saw a slow, terrifying smile spread across the colonel's face. Briggs looked from the drunken lieutenant to Rowan, and then to Tala Rook. He saw an opportunity, a cruel, twisted opportunity to bind the Comanche's hands while he moved his artillery into place. An interesting proposition, Briggs said, his voice carrying in the stillness. "Colonel," Rowan gasped. "You cannot be serious." "The negotiations are stalled," Briggs said. Ignoring her, he looked at Tala. "You say you do not trust us. Tala Rook, you say words are wind. Very well. Let us trade flesh and blood for trust." He gestured to Rowan. "This is Rowan Mercer, daughter of Silas Mercer. She is valuable to us. She is our eyes. You take her. Keep her in your camp for 1 moon. If you harm her, the treaty is broken and we attack. If you return her safely after the moon is full, we will know you are men of honor, and we will sign the agreement to leave your valley untouched." It was a lie, a monstrous lie. Briggs just wanted her out of the way. Or perhaps he hoped they would kill her, so he had a pretext to slaughter them all immediately. Or maybe, crueler still, he simply wanted to humiliate the enemy by forcing a white woman upon them, testing their restraint. "No!" Rowan cried, turning her hoarse. "I am not a sack of flour to be traded. I am an American citizen." "You are an employee, under contract," Briggs snapped, his voice turning to steel. "And you are currently serving a mission vital to national security. If you ride away now, Miss Mercer, you leave these men vulnerable. Do you want a war here, today? Look at them." He gestured to the line of warriors. "Do you want to see them slaughtered right now?" Rowan froze. She looked at the warriors. They were outnumbered, if the shooting started now. In the open, the army's repeating rifles would cut them down in minutes. Tala would die. She looked at Tala. The warrior had not moved. His face was unreadable, mask-like, but his eyes were burning. He looked from Briggs to Rowan, understanding perfectly what had just happened. He saw the cruelty of the white chief. He saw the trap. And he saw the woman, trembling with indignation and terror, being offered up like a sacrificial lamb by her own people. For a moment, Rowan thought he would draw his knife and charge. The rage radiating from him was palpable, a heat wave against her skin. But then he nodded. A single, sharp motion. "I'll take her," Tala said in English. The soldiers gasped. Briggs blinked, surprised that the savage spoke the language. "I take her," Tala repeated, his voice clearer, cutting through the murmurs. "To keep her safe from you." He guided his black horse forward. "But hear this. One arm. If one hair on her head is harmed by your men while she rides with us, if you cross the river before the moon is full, the deal is dead, and I will bring the storm to your door." Briggs waved his hand dismissively. "Agreed. 1 month. A guest of the tribe." He looked at Rowan, his eyes dead. "Go on, Miss Mercer. Do your duty. Map their camp from the inside. It will be illuminating for you." Rowan felt like she was moving underwater. The world had tilted on its axis. One moment she was a cartographer. The next, she was a hostage. "Get down," Briggs ordered. Numbly, Rowan slid from her saddle. Her legs shook so badly she almost collapsed. She stood in the dust, the red earth staining the hem of her gray dress. Tala Rook extended a hand. It was a large hand, calloused and brown, the wrist wrapped in leather. Rowan looked at it, then up at his face. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful, a creature of raw power and intensity. She had a choice. She could run, and likely be shot or cause a massacre. Or she could take the hand of the monster she had been taught to fear since childhood. She reached up. His grip was iron hard, yet he pulled her up with surprising gentleness. She scrambled onto the horse behind him, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist to steady herself. He smelled of wood smoke, sage, and the musk of a man who lived under the sky. His back was broad and warm against her chest. The soldiers erupted in a chorus of jeers and whistles. "That is it, Darlin. Watch out for his scalp knife. See you in a month, if there is anything left of you." Rowan buried her face in the buckskin of Tala's coat, squeezing her eyes shut against the tears of humiliation that threatened to fall. She was being discarded, thrown to the wolves to buy time for a railroad timetable. Tala turned his horse. He did not look back at the fort. He did not look back at Briggs. He kicked the stallion into a trot, leading his warriors back toward the shimmering heat of the valley. Behind them, Briggs watched with a satisfied smirk. He motioned to his aide, a young lieutenant with a notebook. "Mark the trail," Briggs said softly. "Give them 2 weeks to get comfortable. Then we follow the tracks. We will catch them sleeping." The wind whipped Rowan's hair across her face as the horse picked up speed. She felt the powerful muscles of the animal beneath her, carrying her away from everything she knew, everything that was safe. Tala leaned back slightly. He did not turn his head, but his voice drifted back to her, low and resonant, shielded from the wind by his body. His English was accented but flawless, far better than the broken phrases he had used earlier. "Do not trust him," Tala murmured. "Do not trust a word of that man, even if he says he is praying." Rowan stiffened, her hands tightening on his waist. "You speak English," she whispered into the leather of his coat. "I speak many things," Tala replied, his voice vibrating through her chest. "Hold on, mapmaker, we ride fast now." He urged the horse into a gallop. The rhythmic thundering of hooves drowned out the distant laughter of the soldiers. Rowan Mercer, the woman who had come to draw the boundaries of the West, had just crossed a line that could never be erased. She was alone, riding into the heart of the enemy territory, clinging to the only man who seemed to realize that she was worth more than the paper her maps were drawn upon. The journey into the heart of the valley was a descent into a world Rowan had only ever seen through the distorted lens of army reports and fearful whispers. She expected a chaotic hive of savagery, a place of blood and noise. Instead, as the sun dipped low and painted the canyon walls in bruised shades of purple and gold, she found herself riding into a place of startling, rhythmic order. The camp was nestled in a natural bowl where the wind was broken by a stand of cottonwood trees. Dozens of lodges made of buffalo hide rose from the earth like conical mountains, their skins painted with symbols of the sun, the hunt, and the 4 winds. The smell hit her first, not the stench of unwashed bodies she had been warned about, but the rich, earthy scent of curing leather, wood smoke, and roasting meat. As Tala Rook guided his black stallion through the perimeter, a hush fell over the encampment. Children who had been chasing a hoop with sticks froze, their dark eyes wide as they stared at the woman in the gray dress. Women paused in their work of scraping hides or grinding corn, their expressions unreadable masks of caution. Rowan felt the weight of their gaze like physical pressure. To them, she was not a guest. She was a ghost. A pale specter from the world of iron and gunpowder that threatened to consume them. Tala stopped his horse near the center of the camp and slid to the ground. He reached up, not to drag her down, but to offer a steadying hand. When Rowan's boots touched the earth, her legs nearly gave way from the long ride. Tala's grip on her arm tightened just enough to keep her upright. "Stand tall," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "If you look like a victim, they will treat you like one." Rowan straightened her spine, smoothing the dust from her skirts. She lifted her chin, meeting the stares of the circle that had begun to form. An older woman stepped forward. Her face was a map of deep lines, etched by decades of sun and wind, but her eyes were sharp as obsidian shards. She wore a dress of soft deerskin, bleached white, and carried a digging stick in one hand. She spoke to Tala in the Comanche tongue, her tone sharp, questioning. Tala answered her, his voice respectful but firm. He gestured to Rowan, then to the horizon where the railroad tracks lay hidden. He used a phrase Rowan caught Taivo, the word for white person, and then another phrase she did not know, Nu Mui, which she guessed meant something like the writer or the drawer. The old woman stepped closer, invading Rowan's personal space. She reached out a weathered hand and touched the fabric of Rowan's sleeve, then gripped Rowan's hand. Turning it over to inspect the palm, she made a scoffing sound at the lack of calluses. "This is Nawa," Tala said to Rowan. "She is my sister. Her husband was killed by the Bluecoats 3 winters ago. She has no patience for weakness." Nawa said something sharp to Tala, then turned her back on Rowan, gesturing for the white woman to follow. "Go with her," Tala ordered. "You stay in her lodge. You work with her. You eat what she eats." "I am a cartographer," Rowan said, a flash of her old indignation rising. "I do not know how to cure hides." Tala looked at her, his eyes dark and unyielding. "Then you will learn. Here, you are not what you do. You are how you survive." The first week was a blur of exhaustion and sensory overload. Rowan was not treated as a prisoner in chains, but neither was she a guest of honor. She was simply another pair of hands that needed to earn the food she ate. Nawa was a demanding teacher. She spoke no English, or perhaps she simply refused to lower herself to speak it. She communicated with gestures, shoves, and sharp clicks of her tongue. She taught Rowan how to gather the dry wood that burned hottest, how to carry water from the creek without spilling a drop, and how to roast corn until the kernels were sweet and charred just right. At night, Rowan lay on a pile of furs in Nawa's lodge, her body aching in places she didn't know existed. The lodge was warm, smelling of sage and the sweetgrass Nawa burned in the evenings. Through the smoke hole at the top, Rowan could see a circle of stars, brighter than she had ever seen them from the fort. She kept a small, leather-bound journal hidden in the folds of her dress, by the light of the dying embers. She wrote. At first, she recorded the topography, the way the creek snaked through the limestone, the elevation of the northern ridge. It was a habit, a way to keep her mind anchored to the profession she had left behind. But as the days passed, the entries changed. October 12th, 1873. She wrote, "The light here is different. It does not just illuminate, it penetrates. Today, I watched Nawa teach her grandson to string a bow. There was no savagery in it, only patience. I think of my father constantly. He died fighting these people. He told me they were monsters who knew no love. Yet, when Nawa looks at her grandson, I see the same look my father used to give me when I successfully drew a straight line. The lines between enemy and human are blurring, and it frightens me more than the guns." Rowan closed the book and pressed it against her chest. She felt like a traitor for even thinking about it. She was supposed to be the eyes of the army. She was supposed to be mapping their weaknesses. Tala was a constant, silent presence. He did not sleep in Nawa's lodge, but he was always nearby. He moved through the camp with a quiet authority, breaking up disputes among the younger warriors who looked at Rowan with open hostility. He brought fresh meat to Nawa's fire. He checked the hooves of the horses. He was nothing like the officers at the fort who drank whiskey and boasted of battles they had watched through binoculars. Tala carried the weight of his people on his shoulders, a burden that seemed to make him older than his years. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into her captivity, Tala entered the lodge. Nawa was visiting a neighbor, leaving Rowan alone by the fire, mending a tear in her skirt. Tala sat across from her. He placed a piece of charcoal and a scraped, pale piece of hide on the ground between them. "Draw," he said. Rowan looked up, startled. "Draw what?" "The fort," Tala said. His voice was calm, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made the air in the lodge feel thin. "Draw the walls, draw the stables, draw where the soldiers sleep and where they keep the big guns on wheels." Rowan went cold. She dropped her needle. "No." Tala watched her, his expression unchanging. "No, I will not do it," Rowan said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "I will not draw a map for you to attack them. There are men in that fort who are innocent. There are cooks and farriers and young boys who just joined up. I will not help you kill them." "You think I want to kill them?" Tala asked. "Do you think I want to ride against stone walls and cannons with bows and rifles that jam?" "You are a warrior," Rowan accused. That is what you do. You raided the supply trains. You killed settlers. I killed men who came to take the water, Tala corrected sharply. I killed men who shot our horses for sport. He leaned forward, the firelight casting deep shadows across the planes of his face. I do not want to attack your fort. Rowan, I want to know where they will come from. I want to know if they bring the cannons through the main gate, or if they have a back trail. I need to know how to move my people when the blue line advances. He tapped the blank hide. Without a map, we are just shadows in the dark, waiting to be shot. I am asking you to help us run, not to help us kill. Rowan stared at him. She saw the desperation he kept hidden behind his stoic mask. He was not planning a conquest. He was planning a survival. He was trying to figure out how to navigate a storm that was too big to fight. If I draw this, Rowan whispered, and you use it to hurt someone. If I wanted to hurt them, I would have done it already. Tala said, I want to live. I want Nawa to live. Draw the map. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Rowan picked up the charcoal. She began to sketch the perimeter of Fort Redemption. As she drew, she realized she was crossing a line far more significant than the physical border of the territory. She was aiding the enemy, but looking at Tala's intent face as he studied her lines, she could not find it in her heart to call him that anymore. The weather turned 3 days later. The sky, usually a piercing, infinite blue, turned a bruised shade of yellow-green. The wind died suddenly, leaving a terrifying silence that hung over the valley like a shroud. Even the birds stopped singing. Storm, Nawa said, pointing a gnarled finger at the horizon. A wall of brown darkness was swallowing the mountains, moving toward them with the speed of a locomotive. Chaos erupted in the camp. Men shouted, running to secure the horses. Women scrambled to stake down the flaps of the lodges and bury the fires. Rowan was near the creek, helping Nawa gather the drying racks. When the wind hit, it did not build up. It arrived all at once. A physical blow that knocked the breath from her lungs. The air turned into a solid mass of stinging grit. She was blinded instantly. The sand scoured her face, filling her nose and mouth. She couldn't see Nawa. She couldn't see the lodges. She stumbled, disoriented, the roar of the wind drowning out her own scream. A horse screamed nearby, a terrified, high-pitched sound. Something heavy, a branch or a lodge pole, slammed into the ground inches from her feet. She fell to her knees, curling into a ball, trying to shield her face. She was going to be buried here. She was going to die choking on the dust of a foreign land. Then, strong hands grabbed her shoulders. She was hauled upward, pulled against a solid chest. She couldn't see who it was, but she knew the smell, leather and sage. Move! Tala's voice roared in her ear, barely audible over the wind. He didn't try to lead her back to the lodges. The wind was too strong, tearing at anything upright. Instead, he dragged her toward the limestone ridge that bordered the creek. He pulled her into a narrow fissure in the rock, a shallow cave barely deep enough for 2 people. He shoved her all the way to the back, then crowded in front of her, using his broad back to seal the opening against the fury outside. The space was tiny. Rowan was pressed flat against the cold stone, and Tala was pressed against her. She could feel every muscle in his back straining as he braced himself. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace against the chill of the storm. Stay down, he grunted. He pulled the collar of his coat up, trying to shield them both. Rowan buried her face in the curve of his shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. The noise outside was apocalyptic, a howling demon that wanted to tear the world apart. But here, in this sliver of rock, there was a strange, suspended intimacy. She could hear his heart beating. It was a strong, steady rhythm, thudding against her own chest. She could smell the dust on his skin, the sweat of his exertion, and beneath it, the scent of the man himself, earthy and alive. For a long time, neither of them moved. They were just 2 breathing things huddled against the wrath of the earth. Rowan realized, with a jolt that had nothing to do with the storm, that his arm had come around her to brace against the wall, effectively holding her in an embrace. Her hands were clutching the front of his buckskin shirt, holding on for dear life. She looked up, in the dim light filtering through the dust-choked entrance. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched against the grit. He looked vulnerable in a way she had never seen. He opened his eyes. They were dark, rimmed with red dust, and they looked straight into hers. There was no distance between them now, no cultural divide, no war, just the proximity of bodies and the shared instinct to survive. Rowan felt a sudden, sharp pull in her stomach, a yearning to bridge the final inch between them. It was terrifying. It was more dangerous than the storm. Tala held her gaze for a long second, his breathing hitching slightly. Then, slowly, he shifted his weight, creating a fraction of an inch of space, though he did not let go of her. "It will pass," he said, his voice rough. "The wind cannot scream forever." Rowan nodded against his chest, her heart hammering a rhythm that matched his. The storm lasted an hour. When the wind finally died down to a manageable gust, they emerged into a world transformed. Everything was coated in a thick layer of red dust. The creek was choked with debris. Tala helped Rowan out of the crevice. They stood there for a moment, dusting themselves off, the awkwardness of their intimacy hanging between them. Rowan reached up to brush the sand from her neck. As she did, the top button of her dress, loosened during the struggle, gave way. The silver chain she wore underneath slipped out, swinging in the fading light. At the end of the chain hung a small, delicate pendant, a single black crow feather, cast in silver. Tala froze. He reached out, his hand stopping inches from her throat, his eyes fixed on the silver feather with an intensity that made Rowan take a step back. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was not angry, but it was hollow, as if he had seen a ghost. Rowan touched the pendant protectively. "My father gave it to me. He said he found it, after a battle. He said it was a trophy." "A trophy," Tala repeated. He looked up at her face, really looking at her features, the set of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. A shadow passed over his face, a mixture of pain and a dawning, terrible understanding. "He lied," Tala said softly. "What?" Rowan bristled. "My father was a scout. He was an honest man." "He was a man who took what was not his," Tala said. He stepped closer, disregarding the personal space he had so carefully maintained before. He reached out and touched the silver feather with the tip of his finger. 15 years ago, Tala said, his voice distant. There was a wagon train attacked near the Salt Fork. Not by us, by Comancheros bandits who dressed like us to steal without blame. Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "I know. My father told me. He said he arrived too late." "The wagons were burning," Tala continued. His eyes locked on hers. "There was a child, a little girl with hair like dried grass. She was trapped under a broken wheel. The fire was eating the wood." Rowan's breath caught. She had nightmares about fire. She always had, but she had never known why. "I was a boy then," Tala said. "I pulled her out. Her dress was smoking. I cut it away. I gave her my own necklace to quiet her crying. A real feather, tied with sinew. I left her near the water where the soldiers would find her, because I could not take a white child back to my people then. It would have meant war." He looked at the silver pendant. "Your father found you. He found the feather on your neck, and he cast it in silver, and told you it was a trophy of war." Rowan stared at him, her world tilting on its axis again. The story fit, the nightmares, the strange gap in her memory before the age of 6, the way her father had always been vague about the day he found her. "You," she whispered. "You saved me." Tala dropped his hand. He looked weary. "I saved a life. I did not know I was saving the daughter of the man who would later guide the soldiers to my brother's camp." The irony hung heavy between them. He had saved her, and her father had used his knowledge of the Comanche to hunt them. And now, she was here, completing the circle. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rowan asked, her voice trembling. "Because until this moment," Tala said, turning away to look at the ravaged camp, "I did not want to believe that the gods have such a cruel sense of humor." The dynamic between them shifted after the storm. The fear Rowan had carried was replaced by a confused, aching gratitude. She watched him differently now, She saw the boy who had pulled her from the fire and the man who now commanded warriors. 2 days later, Nawa decided that Rowan was useless on the ground and needed to learn to ride properly, not with a heavy army saddle, but the Comanche way, balancing on the animal's movement. They were in the corral. Rowan was mounted on a gentle paint mare, clutching the mane, slipping sideways every time the horse shifted. "Knees tight," Nawa shouted in Comanche, slapping her own thighs. Rowan slipped again, nearly sliding off the side. Strong hands caught her by the waist. Tala stepped in, stabilizing her. "You fight the horse," he said, looking up at her. "Do not fight. Move with her. She is water, you are the leaf." He didn't let go. His hands were warm and firm on her waist. For the first time, Rowan didn't flinch. She looked down at him, her hands resting on his shoulders for balance. The air around them seemed to charge with static. The memory of the cave, the heat of his body, the revelation of the pendant, it all swirled in the space between them. Tala looked up, his dark eyes softening. For a fleeting second, he wasn't a warrior, and she wasn't a hostage. They were just a man and a woman in the golden light of the afternoon. "You are safe," he said, and it sounded like a vow. "I caught you then. I have you now." Rowan felt a flush rise in her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was necessary, his thumbs brushing the fabric of her dress at her waist. Then he stepped back, the mask of the warrior sliding back into place, but the connection had been made. It was a thread of steel connecting them, invisible and unbreakable. That night, the peace was shattered. Rowan was sitting by the fire, writing in her journal. When the sound of galloping hooves thundered into the camp, Tala rode in. His horse was foaming with sweat. He slid from the saddle, and Rowan saw immediately that one sleeve of his buckskin shirt was dark with blood. She gasped, dropping her book and running to him. "You are hurt." "Not my blood," Tala said grimly. He wiped his face, smearing red dust across his forehead. He looked around the camp, then his eyes landed on Rowan. He walked to her, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the dying firelight. "Your colonel," Tala said, his voice hard, "is a man of great industry." "What happened?" Rowan asked, fear clutching her heart. "I found his scouts," Tala said. 3 of them, on the ridge, 3 miles from here. They were not hunting game. They were using survey chains, measuring the distance for artillery. Rowan went cold. 3 miles. That is the range for the Parrot guns. "Yes," Tala said. "He is not waiting for the moon to be full. He is coming now." He looked deep into her eyes. "The man with one arm does not stop. He will be here in 2 days, maybe less. I have to choose tonight. Rowan, I can order my people to run, and we lose the valley forever. Or we can stay and fight." He squeezed her arm. "You drew the map of the fort. You know his mind. You are the map maker." "What are you asking?" Rowan whispered. "I am asking you to choose," Tala said. "You can hide when they come, wave your white handkerchief, and go back to your bookstore. Or you can help us use this valley to break them." Rowan looked at his blood-stained sleeve, then at the sleeping lodges of the camp. She thought of Briggs's cold blue eyes. She thought of the silver feather around her neck. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was no longer a pawn. She was the queen on the board, and the next move belonged to her. "Show me the map of the canyon," Rowan said, her voice steady. "I need to show you where the bottleneck is." The intelligence brought back by the scouts was fragmentary, like shards of pottery found in the dust. But when pieced together, they formed a vessel of war. Tala Rook sat cross-legged near the central fire, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows across his face. Beside him sat the tribal elders, their faces grim, and Rowan, who had been summoned not as a servant, but as a witness. The scouts spoke of a new element in the equation. It was not just the blue-coated regulars of Colonel Briggs massing near the river. There were others, riders who wore dusters instead of uniforms, men who carried heavy buffalo rifles and rode horses that had been ridden hard. "Maddox," Tala said, the name sounding like a curse in his throat. He looked at Rowan. "Cole Maddox. Do you know him?" Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I have heard the name. He was a cavalry officer once, dishonorably discharged after the massacre at Sand Creek. They say he leads a company of mercenaries now, men who kill for coins, not countries. He is here, Tala said, drawing a line in the dirt with his knife. Briggs has hired him to do the work that might stain a uniform too deeply. They are sweeping the southern ridge, driving the game away, poisoning the wells. The implication was clear. This was not a military engagement. It was an extermination. The railroad company wanted the land clear, and they were not particular about how it happened. If the Comanche would not go to the reservation, a patch of desolate scrubland, hundreds of miles to the south, they would be removed by other means. Later that night, inside Nawa's lodge, Tala spread Rowan's map on a flat stone. The charcoal lines she had drawn of the valley were stark against the pale hide. "Show me," Tala commanded softly. "Show me the throat of the valley." Rowan knelt beside him. Her hand hovered over the drawing. She traced the winding path of the river, the steep rise of the canyon walls. "Here," she said, pointing to a narrow pass in the east. "And here, to the north, these are the only ways a wagon or a cannon can enter. And here," Tala pointed to a jagged line of cliffs on the western rim. "Impassable for wagons," Rowan said. "But a horse could make it. A goat trail." Tala looked at her. "If Briggs blocks the east and north, we are trapped. He will set his guns on the ridges and rain fire down until there is nothing left but ash." Rowan looked at the map. It was a beautiful thing, accurate and precise. It was also a death sentence. She realized with a sick feeling that this very drawing, if it fell into Briggs's hands, would tell him exactly where to place his artillery to ensure maximum casualties. But in Tala's hands, it was the only hope for a defense. She faced a choice that tore at her conscience. She was a citizen of the United States, sworn to aid its progress. But the definition of progress she saw in Briggs's cold eyes and Maddox's brutality was something she could not stomach. "I can show you the firing angles," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can show you where a cannon cannot reach. The blind spots." Tala studied her face for a long moment. "If you do this, there is no going back to the fort. Rowan, you will be a traitor to your flag." "My flag is supposed to stand for justice," she replied, picking up the charcoal. "I do not see any justice coming from the east." 2 days later, the sky hung low and heavy, pregnant with rain. Tala decided they needed to physically inspect the western goat trail. If the tribe had to flee, the women and children would need a route that the heavy cavalry horses could not follow. He had a small party himself, 2 young warriors, and Rowan. They rode light, leaving the main camp at dawn. The terrain grew rugged as they ascended the western rim. The red rock turned to gray limestone, slick with the moisture in the air. Rowan rode her paint mare with more confidence now, her body moving in rhythm with the animal. She wore a buckskin jacket Nawa had given her over her gray dress, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare. They reached a narrow defile, a slash in the earth known as the Devil's Gullet. It was a natural fortress, walls rising 50 feet on either side. "We stop here," Tala signaled, raising a hand. "We check the footing." They dismounted. Tala walked ahead, studying the ground. Rowan stayed near the horses, adjusting her saddle cinch. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. One of the young warriors spun around, clutching his thigh, blood blooming dark against his leggings. "Cover!" Tala roared, drawing his repeater in a fluid motion. From the ridge above, figures appeared, men in long coats, firing down into the gullet. It was Maddox's men. They had been waiting. Bullets kicked up spurts of dirt around Rowan's feet. The horses screamed and reared. "Get to the rocks!" Tala shouted, sprinting toward her. He grabbed her arm and hauled her behind a fallen boulder just as a slug slammed into the stone where her head had been a second before. The canyon erupted in noise. The booming report of buffalo rifles echoed off the walls, deafening and disorienting. Rowan huddled behind the rock, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the young warrior dragging himself toward cover, leaving a trail of red. The other warrior was returning fire, his bow singing. but the angle was bad. They were pinned down. "They have the high ground," Tala gritted out. "Reloading his Winchester. We have to move back to the caves." He looked at Rowan. "Can you shoot?" I have a revolver," she stammered, fumbling for the small pistol in her belt. "Use it," Tala said. "Keep their heads down." He rose to fire, and Rowan forced herself to peer over the rock. She saw a man on the ridge taking aim at the wounded warrior. Without thinking, she raised her pistol and fired. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the man flinch and duck. "Good!" Tala yelled. "Move now!" They broke cover, running for the deeper shadow of the canyon bend where a series of caves pitted the wall. Rowan ran, her lungs burning. She heard the whine of bullets passing inches from her ear. She stumbled on loose shale, falling to one knee. "Rowan!" Tala turned back. A rifleman on the ridge stood up, taking careful aim at her exposed back. Tala did not hesitate. He threw himself across the gap, his body colliding with hers. Shielding her, she heard the wet, sickening thud of a bullet striking flesh. Tala grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, and jerked violently. But he didn't fall. He grabbed her by the jacket and hauled her up. "Go!" he snarled, his face pale. They scrambled into the mouth of the largest cave, collapsing into the darkness just as a fresh volley of lead chipped the stone entrance. The two warriors followed, dragging the wounded man in behind them. They were safe from the gunfire, but they were trapped and outside. The heavens finally opened, unleashing a torrential downpour that masked the sound of the approaching killers. The cave was deep and dry, smelling of bat guano and old earth. They moved far back, away from the entrance, until the light from outside was just a gray rectangle in the distance. Tala slid down against the cavern wall, his breathing ragged. He pressed his hand to his left shoulder, high on the chest. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and slick. "Tala!" Rowan gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "It is nothing," he rasped, though his face was gray. "Through and through. Let me see," she demanded. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. "Move your hand." He pulled his hand away. The bullet had torn through the heavy muscle of his shoulder, dangerously close to the collarbone. The buckskin shirt was soaked. "I need to clean it," Rowan said, looking around. "We need water. And fire." The uninjured warrior nodded. He moved deeper into the cave, gathering dry driftwood that had washed in during past floods. He struck a spark with flint and steel, nursing a small, smokeless flame to life. Rowan took her canteen. She tore a strip from her petticoat. "You need to take the shirt off," she said, looking at Tala. The blood had glued the leather to his skin. Tala looked at her, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. "The white people say the Comanche are wild beasts," he murmured, his voice strained. "Yet here you are, demanding to strip the beast." "Be quiet," Rowan said, her cheeks flushing, "or I will let you bleed." She reached for the top button of his shirt. It was made of bone, fastened with a leather thong. Her fingers were slick with his blood, making them clumsy. She undid the first button, then the second. Her knuckles grazed the warm, damp skin of his chest. He was built of hard planes and rigid muscle, his body a testament to a life of survival. As she worked down the row of buttons, peeling the wet leather away from his chest, his breathing hitched. It wasn't just pain. The air in the cave, already close, seemed to tighten. She pushed the shirt off his shoulders, exposing the angry, bleeding wound, but also the expanse of his torso copper skin, old scars, the steady, powerful beat of his heart visible beneath his ribs. She poured water onto the cloth and pressed it to the wound. Tala hissed, his back arching off the stone. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not to stop her, but to ground himself against the agony. "I am sorry," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I have to clean it." She worked gently but firmly, washing away the grit and gunpowder. His grip on her wrist tightened until her bones ached, but he made no sound other than ragged breaths. When it was done, she used another strip of cloth to bind the wound tightly. She sat back on her heels, exhausted, her hands resting on his bare chest to steady herself. Tala opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated pools in the firelight. He looked at her blood-stained hands on his skin, then up at her face. The teasing glint was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry intensity. "You have a gentle touch for a woman who draws war maps," he whispered. "I am not a soldier," Rowan said softly. She should pull her hands away. She knew she should, but she didn't. Her fingers traced the line of a white scar that ran down his ribs. Tala groaned, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. It was a sound of pain. Yes, but underneath it was something else, a surrender. "Darlin," he breathed, the English endearment sounding rough and foreign on his tongue. "You will drive me past redemption." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Rowan felt her heart stutter. Past redemption. It was the name of the fort, the place of salvation. But here, in the dark, it meant something else. It meant crossing a line from which there was no return. "Maybe," she whispered, leaning closer, drawn by a gravity she could not resist. "Maybe we are both already past it." She looked at his mouth. He looked at hers. The distance between them was nothing. She could feel his heat, smell the rain and the iron scent of blood. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to press herself against the life that beat so fiercely within him, to affirm that they were both still here, still breathing. Tala's hand moved from her wrist to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed her lower lip. His eyes searched hers, finding the fear and the desire tangled together. "I saw you," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "Years ago, in the smoke." Rowan froze. The moment was suspended. "You said you saved a child," she whispered. "I saved you," Tala said. "I remember the eyes, gray like the river in winter, defiant even then." "I remember hands," Rowan said, a memory unlocking in her mind like a door blowing open. "Strong hands, pulling me from the wheel. The heat was so bad. I thought I was burning, but the hands were cool." She covered his hand on her cheek with her own. "It was you." "The raid," Tala continued, his thumb stroking her skin. "Your father told you it was Comanche. It was not. It was Comancheros, white men and Mexicans who paint their faces to steal horses and blame us. My brother and I, we were tracking them. We tried to stop it. We were too late for the others, but not for you." Rowan felt a tear slip free, tracking hot down her face. "My father, he knew. He found you with my feather," Tala said. "He knew someone had spared you, but hate is a simpler story to tell a child than the truth." They sat there, the revelation settling around them like the dust outside. Two victims of the same lie, brought together by the very war that was meant to keep them apart. Rowan leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. She was trembling. "We are enemies, Tala. The world says we are enemies. The world is wrong," Tala murmured. He tilted his head, his nose brushing against hers. It was an intimacy more profound than any kiss. It was an acknowledgement of shared souls. Rowan shifted, her body softening against his. She wanted to undo the rest of the buttons, not his, but hers. She wanted to shed the layers of gray wool and societal expectation. But Tala pulled back, just an inch. He took a ragged breath and gently caught her hands, moving them away from his chest. "Rowan," he said, his voice straining with the effort of control. "If I kiss you now, if I take what I want, I confirm every lie they tell about me, that I am a savage who steals women." He looked at her with a fierce, protective tenderness. "You are not a prize of war. You are not a hostage to be taken in the dark. You are Rowan. And when I touch you, I want it to be because you are free, not because you are afraid, or grateful, or trapped in a cave." Rowan stared at him, her chest aching. He was offering her dignity. He was placing her honor above his own desire. Even here, at the edge of death. "You are a better man than any I have known in the fort," she whispered. "I am just a man," Tala said, bringing her knuckles to his lips for a brief, searing kiss. A man who does not want to break the only beautiful thing he has found in this war." He released her hands and leaned his head back against the stone, exhaustion finally overtaking him. "We must plan. Maddox will not wait for the rain to stop." Rowan wiped her face, steeling herself. She picked up the map case she had dragged into the cave. She opened it, the paper damp but legible. "The goat trail is compromised," she said, her voice steadying. "They know about it. That is why they were waiting. They have a tracker," Tala said, eyes closed. "Someone good. If they control the Western Rim," Rowan said, her mind racing, clicking into the professional mode that was her armor. "And Briggs is coming from the east. They are trying to drive you into the box canyon at the south end." "A killing jar?" Tala agreed. "But the box canyon has a secret," Rowan said. She pointed to a faint line she had drawn weeks ago, based on an old story Nawa had told her. "The limestone is porous there. There is a sinkhole, a tunnel that leads out to the riverbed, 2 miles downstream." Tala opened his eyes. "The spirit tunnel, it is flooded." "Not in the dry season," Rowan said. "The rain started today. It will take 2 days to fill. It is muddy, it is tight, but it is open." "We can get the women and children out," Tala said, hope flaring in his eyes. "And," Rowan added, a hard edge entering her voice, "if we lure Maddox's men into the box canyon thinking they have you trapped, and then we blow the overhang, we bury them," Tala finished. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "You fight like a Comanche, Rowan Mercer." "No," she said, touching the silver feather in her throat. "I fight like the daughter of the man who saved me." The rain stopped just before dawn. The silence that followed was heavy and wet. They moved out under the cover of the morning mist. Tala was weak, his face pale, but he sat on his horse with grim determination. Rowan rode beside him, her pistol reloaded, her eyes scanning the ridge. They reached the main camp as the sun began to burn through the clouds. The mood in the valley was frantic. The sound of distant thunder rolled from the east, but the sky there was clear. "Cannons," Tala said. A scout galloped out to meet them. His horse lathered. "Crow!" the scout shouted. "Smoke on the long ridge. The blue coats are moving. The heavy guns are being wheeled into position." Rowan looked toward the eastern entrance of the valley. She could imagine it perfectly, the 12-pounder Napoleons, the caissons full of shells and canisters. She had drawn the elevation for those very ridges. "And the south?" Tala asked. "Dust," the scout reported. "Maddox and his riders. They are pushing hard." Rowan looked at the map in her mind. Her valley. The lines of ink she had drawn with such care were now battle lines. The topography she had loved was about to be reshaped by high explosives. "They are early," Rowan said. "Briggs didn't wait for the moon." "He never intended to," Tala said. He turned to her. "Go to Nawa. Get the children. Move them to the tunnel." "And you?" Rowan asked, gripping his arm. "I am going to the box canyon," Tala said. "I have to leave a trail for Maddox to follow. I have to be the bait." "You are wounded," she argued. "That makes me better bait," he smiled, a sharp, dangerous baring of teeth. "Go, Rowan. Be the map maker. Show them the way out." He wheeled his horse and galloped toward the gathering warriors. Rowan watched him go, the image of his broad back and the black horse searing itself into her memory. She turned her mare toward the lodges. The time for drawing was over. The time for erasing had begun. She would lead the innocent into the dark of the earth, while the man she loved rode out to pull the sky down upon his enemies. The air in the valley was so thick with tension it felt brittle, as if a single shout could shatter the sky. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and smelling of wet sage. But a different kind of thunder was rolling in from the east. It was the rhythmic, mechanical thud of hooves and the creak of iron-rimmed wheels. Rowan stood inside Nawa's lodge, her hands moving with a precision that defied her racing heart. She held the map she had drawn, the master copy, the one that showed every deer trail, every water source, and the secret exit through the sinkhole tunnel. With a deep breath, she tore the heavy parchment in two. She took a second sheet, a rough sketch she had prepared the night before, and marked a heavy charcoal line leading directly into the blind box canyon on the western rim. She folded this forgery and handed it to a young scout named Hania. "You know what to do?" Rowan asked, her voice steady. Hania nodded, his eyes wide but fierce. "I drop it where the scout who betrays will find it, near the creek crossing. Make it look like you fled in a panic," Rowan instructed. "Drop a water skin too. Make them believe we were careless." Tala entered the lodge. He had bound his shoulder tight with fresh leather, and though his face was drawn, his movements were sharp. He watched the boy run out with the false map. "The men are in position," Tala said. "The women are gathering at the tunnel entrance. Nawa's waiting for you." He stepped closer, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from Rowan's forehead. His hand lingered for a moment, warm and rough against her skin. "You guide them through the dark. Rowan, do not stop. If you hear shooting, you keep moving." "And you?" Rowan asked, gripping his wrist. "You are walking into the fire." "I am the fire," Tala said softly. "Today, they will burn." He did not kiss her. The moment was too sharp, too fragile for softness. He turned and ducked out of the lodge, mounting his black stallion and riding toward the canyon where death was waiting. Colonel Harlan Briggs sat atop his gray gelding, surveying the valley through his field glass. The sun was high, baking the wet earth until steam rose in ghostly pillars. Behind him, the artillery crews were unlimbering the 12-pounder Napoleon guns. "Range, 2,000 yards. Briggs barked. "Elevation, 15 degrees. Fire for effect." The ground jumped. The roar of the cannons was a physical blow, a concussive wave that slapped against the chest. Seconds later, the shells whistled through the air and slammed into the cluster of buffalo hide lodges in the distance. Explosions bloomed like ugly red flowers. Earth, wood, and hide were thrown into the air. "Reload!" the artillery sergeant screamed. They fired for 10 minutes. A relentless, methodical pounding meant to break the spirit before the body was even touched. When the smoke finally drifted on the breeze, the camp was a ruin. Lodges lay flattened. Fires burned unchecked. But there was no screaming. There was no chaotic flight of panicked savages. "Move in," Briggs ordered, drawing his saber with his single hand. "Cavalry! Forward Maddox! Flank left!" The column charged, hooves tearing up the sod. They swept into the camp, pistols drawn, ready to slaughter. They found nothing. Briggs pulled his horse up amidst the wreckage of Nawa's lodge. A cooking pot lay overturned. The stew spilled into the dirt. A doll made of corn husks lay near the fire pit. But there were no bodies, no horses. "Empty," Cole Maddox spat, riding up beside him. Maddox was a bear of a man in a greasy duster, holding a Sharps rifle like it was a toy. "They ran. The rats scurried." "Where?" Briggs demanded, his face purpling. "They cannot have vanished." A shout came from the creek. One of Maddox's trackers held up a piece of parchment. "Found it," the man yelled. "Drop near the water. It is a map." Briggs snatched the paper. He recognized the hand immediately. Rowan's precise lines. He traced the charcoal path. "The western box canyon." Briggs sneered. "They are trying to climb out the goat trail. They are trapped." He looked at Maddox. "Take your men. Ride hard. Cut them off before they reach the rim. I will bring the main column up the center to crush them against the wall. Consider it done." Maddox grinned, revealing yellow teeth. He whistled to his mercenaries. "Let us go hunting, boys." As Maddox thundered away, Briggs looked at the ruined camp. A flicker of unease pricked at the back of his neck. It was too easy. But the bloodlust was up, and the prize, the total annihilation of the nuisance in the valley, was within his grasp. The box canyon was a cathedral of stone. 3 sides of sheer red cliffs rising 500 feet toward the sky. The only way in was a narrow throat at the bottom. Maddox and his 30 riders galloped into the shadow of the cliffs, their eyes scanning the scree for fleeing families. They saw fresh tracks, hundreds of hoofprints churning the mud. "There!" a mercenary shouted, pointing to the far end. A lone rider sat on a black horse, motionless as a statue. It was Tala. Maddox laughed. "There is the prize, $1,000 for his scalp." The mercenaries spurred their horses, screaming rebel yells, closing the distance. Tala watched them come. He did not move. He did not draw his weapon. He simply sat, a silent judge in the center of the amphitheater. When the lead riders were 50 yards away, Tala raised his right hand, high above, on the rim of the canyon. A dozen Comanche warriors stepped to the edge. They did not fire arrows. They leveraged their weight against massive logs that had been wedged behind boulders the size of wagons. The earth groaned. Maddox looked up just as the sky turned dark. "Back!" Maddox screamed, hauling on his reins. "Pull back!" It was too late. The avalanche did not fall. It poured. Tons of limestone, shale, and timber crashed down into the narrow throat of the canyon, sealing the exit in a choking cloud of white dust and thunder. Then came the fire. From the ledges halfway down the cliffs, hidden warriors rose up. They were not firing blindly. They were firing with the repeating rifles they had captured from supply trains over the years. Lead rained down on the trapped men. Horses screamed, rearing and throwing their riders. The box canyon became a killing jar. Maddox, thrown from his horse by a falling rock, scrambled behind a deadfall, blood streaming from a gash in his head. He tried to aim his sharps, but a bullet from above took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another struck his leg. In the center of the chaos, Tala finally moved. He wheeled his stallion and rode toward the back wall, where the hidden warriors had lowered ropes. He was not there to die. He was there to ensure the door was slammed shut. Miles away, in the spirit tunnel, Rowan was leading the line of women and children through the suffocating dark. The tunnel was wet, the mud sucking at their boots. Nawa carried a torch at the rear, while Rowan held a lantern at the front. "Keep moving," Rowan whispered, her voice echoing off the damp walls. "We are almost there." They emerged into the blinding light of a ravine near the riverbed, 2 miles south of the fighting. The sound of the ambush was a distant rumble, like summer thunder. "We made it," Rowan breathed, helping a young mother climb over a driftwood log. "Do not celebrate yet, mapmaker." The voice was cold and familiar. Rowan froze. She looked up toward the lip of the ravine. A patrol of blue-coated cavalry soldiers stood there, carbines leveled. And behind them, having realized the trap in the canyon and retreated to the reserve lines, rode Colonel Harlan Briggs. Briggs looked disheveled. His uniform was dusty, his face a mask of fury. He had lost half his force in the canyon, but fate had delivered him a consolation prize. "The tunnel," Briggs said, realizing the strategy instantly. "Mercer, you clever little witch!" The soldiers slid down the embankment, surrounding the group of women and children. Nawa raised her digging stick, standing in front of the children, but a soldier struck her with the butt of his rifle, knocking her into the mud. "No!" Rowan screamed, rushing forward. Briggs spurred his horse, cutting her off. He leaned down, his face twisted. "You drew them a map. You sent my men to be butchered." "I sent killers to a grave," Rowan spat, her fear eclipsed by rage. "And now you will watch your friends join them." Briggs snarled. He grabbed Rowan by the hair, dragging her toward his horse. He pulled her up, clamping his single arm around her waist like a vice, using her body as a shield. "Form a firing line," Briggs ordered his remaining men. "Execute the prisoners. Leave none to breed." The soldiers hesitated. Shooting armed warriors was one thing. Shooting women and children lined up against a riverbank was another. "I gave you an order," Briggs screamed, drawing his revolver and pressing the cold barrel against Rowan's temple. "Do it, or the girl dies first." Rowan squeezed her eyes shut. "Don't," she whispered, though she didn't know who she was pleading with. Then, a war cry shattered the air. Not a scream of rage, but a high, piercing note like a hawk diving. "Tala!" He appeared on the high bank of the ravine, his black horse silhouetted against the sun. He had ridden through the chaos, tracked them, and arrived at the moment of execution. He had a clear line of sight to Briggs. He raised his Winchester. Rowan opened her eyes. She saw Tala, She saw the rifle aimed at them. "Shoot!" she screamed. "Tala, shoot him!" But Tala hesitated. Briggs was cowering behind her. A shot at the colonel would likely pass through Rowan's chest. Tala lowered the rifle. He tossed it aside. He drew his knife, a heavy Bowie blade he had taken from a soldier years ago, and kicked his stallion into a slide down the steep embankment. "Fire on him!" Briggs shrieked. The soldiers turned. Firing wildly at the rushing horse, the black stallion took a hit in the flank but kept coming, fueled by the momentum of the descent. Tala did not slow down. As the horse reached the bottom, he launched himself from the saddle. He didn't go for Briggs. He went for the soldier nearest to Rowan, the one raising his rifle to shoot Nawa. Tala hit the man with the force of a falling boulder, driving his knife into the soldier's shoulder and throwing him aside. He rolled, coming up on his feet, placing himself directly between the firing squad and the women. "Stop!" Rowan screamed, struggling against Briggs. "Stop firing!" The soldiers lowered their guns, confused by the sudden chaos and the ferocity of the lone warrior. Briggs, seeing his control slipping, panicked. He threw Rowan to the ground and leveled his pistol at Tala's chest. "Die, you animal!" Briggs shouted. Click! The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Briggs had fired his rounds in the canyon and forgotten to reload in his rage. Tala saw the mistake. He didn't run. He stalked forward. Briggs fumbled to holster the pistol and draw his saber with his one hand, but he was too slow. Tala lunged. He knocked the saber away with his forearm and slammed his body into Briggs, driving the colonel backward into the mud. They grappled. It was not a duel of skill. It was a brawl of desperation. Briggs clawed at Tala's wounded shoulder, tearing the bandage, making fresh blood pour. Tala grunted but didn't let go. He drove his knee into Briggs's stomach and pinned him to the earth. The knife blade flashed in the sun. Tala pressed it against the soft skin of Briggs's throat. Silence fell over the ravine. The soldiers watched, paralyzed. The Comanche women watched. Briggs stared up, his blue eyes wide with the realization of his mortality. "Go on," he choked out, blood bubbling on his lips from a bitten tongue. "Do it. Cut my throat. Show them you are the savage I told them you were." Tala's hand trembled. The rage in his eyes was a terrifying thing. This man had ordered the death of his brother. He had tried to kill Rowan. He represented every broken treaty, every starving winter, every lie told to the Comanche people. The blade bit into the skin. A thin line of red appeared. "Tala!" Rowan's voice cut through the red haze. She had scrambled to her knees in the mud. "Tala, look at me!" she cried. Tala did not look. His gaze was fixed on Briggs. "If you kill him now," Rowan said, her voice cracking, "you become him. They will write it in the history books that you murdered an unarmed officer. They will use his death to justify wiping out everyone behind you." "He deserves to die," Tala growled, his voice guttural. "Yes," Rowan agreed. "He does, but you do not deserve to be his executioner. You are a leader. Tala, leaders choose life." She crawled closer, reaching out to touch his arm, the arm holding the knife. Her hand was small against his tense muscles. "Do not let him take your soul. Too," she whispered. "He has taken enough." Tala froze. He looked at Rowan. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the fierce belief in him. He looked at the women and children huddled behind him. He looked at the soldiers, who were watching not with hatred, but with a strange, suspended awe. Tala took a deep, shuddering breath. He pulled the knife back. He stood up, grabbing Briggs by the collar and hauling him to his feet. He shoved the colonel toward the soldiers. "Take him," Tala said in English, his voice ringing with contempt. "Take him away from my land. He is not worth the stain on my blade." Briggs stumbled, clutching his throat. He looked at his men. "Shoot him! Shoot them all!" The soldiers did not move. "Sergeant!" A new voice boomed from the top of the ravine. "I believe the colonel is relieved of command." Everyone looked up. Standing on the ridge was Sergeant Martinez, and beside him sat a man in a black suit, flanked by a dozen federal marshals. It was Commissioner Henry Dawes, the man Rowan had written to weeks ago. Using Martinez to smuggle the letter out? Dawes rode his horse down the embankment, looking at the scene with a cold, judicial eye. He looked at the terrified women, the wounded warrior, and the frothing colonel. "Colonel Briggs," Dawes said, producing a warrant. "I have received disturbing reports of unauthorized military action against a tribe under Parley. It seems the cartographer's map you were so eager to acquire was sent to me as well, along with your battle plans." Briggs went pale. He looked at Rowan. She stood beside Tala, her gray dress torn and muddy, but her head high. "You," Briggs whispered. "The mapmaker," Rowan said coldly. "I told you. I draw the truth." The marshals moved in, taking Briggs's sword and clamping irons on his single wrist. It was a humiliation worse than death for a man of his pride. As they dragged him away, Briggs screamed threats, but the wind swallowed them. The adrenaline finally left Tala. He staggered, his knees buckling. Rowan caught him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him up as he had once held her. "It is over," she wept into his chest. Tala looked at the soldiers retreating, then at his people who were alive because of a tunnel and a map. He looked down at the woman holding him together. "No," he whispered, resting his chin on her hair. "The fighting is over. The living begins." The sun was setting by the time the dust settled. The losses were heavy. 5 warriors had died in the canyon. Maddox and his mercenaries were dead or scattered. The black stallion had to be put down, a mercy that Tala performed himself with a single, silent tear. Rowan sat near a small fire, holding a 3-year-old boy whose father had not returned from the ambush. The child was asleep, clutching her thumb. She looked across the firelight. Tala sat on a stone, shirtless, while Nawa cleaned and stitched the fresh wound on his shoulder. He stared into the flames, his face unreadable. He looked up and caught her gaze. He didn't smile. There was too much death for smiling. But he nodded, a slow, solemn acknowledgement. He stood up and walked over to her. He knelt in the dirt, placing a hand on the sleeping boy's head, then moving his hand to cover Rowan's. "You stopped me," he said quietly, "from becoming the monster. You are not a monster, Tala," Rowan said. "You never were." "I wanted to be," he confessed. "When I felt his throat under my hand, I wanted it. That is why you are human," Rowan said. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. "And that is why you are still here." 3 days later, Commissioner Dawes requested a meeting. He set up a table in the open air, between the camp and the river. "The government is willing to make a concession," Dawes said, adjusting his spectacles. "Given the irregularities of Colonel Briggs' conduct and the validity of your claim to this valley." He unfolded a new map. "You may keep the northern half of the valley, the hunting grounds, the graves of your ancestors." Tala looked at the map. It was less than they had, but more than they had hoped to keep. "But," Dawes continued, "the railroad must pass through the south. The line must be built, and we need assurance that the trains will not be molested." "You have my word," Tala said. "Washington does not trust words," Dawes said. "They trust structures. We need a liaison, someone who lives near the tracks, someone who speaks both languages, a bridge between the reservation and the rail." Dawes looked at Tala. Then he looked at Rowan. "Miss Mercer," Dawes said, "you have no contract with the Army anymore. You have no home at the fort, but the railroad company needs a station master, a postmistress, someone to run the supply depot here." He pushed a paper toward her. "It comes with a deed to the land adjacent to the station, 300 acres. Rowan looked at the paper. Then she looked at the valley, where the smoke of the campfires was rising again. She looked at Tala, who was watching her with an intensity that stopped her breath. He wasn't asking her to stay. He was waiting to see if she would choose to. Rowan picked up the pen. She didn't look at the $300 she had saved in her mind. She looked at the man who had pulled her from the fire twice, once as a child, and once as a woman. "I will need lumber," Rowan said to the commissioner, "for a schoolhouse." Tala let out a breath, a sound that might have been a laugh if he remembered how. "I will cut the wood," he said. The bridge had been built, not of iron or stone, but of two people who had stood in the fire and refused to burn. The dust of the battle had settled, but the air in the valley remained heavy, charged with the static of a world reshaping itself. The physical war was over, silenced by the arrival of Commissioner Dawes and the arrest of Colonel Briggs. Yet a different kind of struggle had begun. It was a war of words, of paper, and of the uncertain future that lay between the ink and the seal. The council was held 3 days later, beneath the sprawling canopy of a cottonwood tree that had survived the artillery fire. A rough-hewn table, brought from one of the supply wagons, sat oddly against the backdrop of the recovering Comanche camp. On one side sat Commissioner Henry Dawes, a man whose black suit absorbed the heat of the sun, making him look perpetually uncomfortable. Beside him sat Sergeant Martinez, who had traded his blue uniform for a canvas shirt, acting now as a bridge between the army he had served and the people he had come to respect. On the other side sat the tribal elders, their faces etched with the deep lines of grief and survival. Tala Rook sat among them, not as a chief, but as the war leader who had guided them through the fire. His shoulder was bandaged, the white linen stark against his dark skin, and his eyes were fixed on the document spread across the wood. Rowan sat at the end of the table. She was the conduit, the voice that turned the commissioner's bureaucratic English into the flowing, tonal language of the Comanche, and the elder's metaphorical, earthbound speech back into words that Washington could understand. "The agreement stipulates," Dawes said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, "that the tribe retains the northern hunting grounds, extending to the base of the Spirit Rock. In exchange, the southern corridor, specifically the river crossing and the flatlands, is ceded to the railroad company for the laying of track and the construction of a watering station." Rowan translated. She felt the weight of every word. She was carving up the land she had learned to love, slicing it into parcels of ours and theirs. One of the elders, a man named Grey Horse whose son had died in the Box Canyon, spoke sharply. He gestured to the south, his voice rising in anger. Rowan listened, her heart aching, then turned to Dawes. "He says that the southern flatlands are where the buffalo winter. If you put the iron road there, the herds will break. He asks if the Great Father in Washington intends for them to eat steam and iron instead of meat." Dawes sighed, tapping his pen against the paper. Tell him that the company has agreed to provide rations of beef, monthly deliveries. It is in the addendum." When Rowan translated this, a ripple of unease went through the Comanche side of the table. To hunt was to be free. To wait for handouts of beef was to be a pet. Tala spoke then. His voice was low, vibrating with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs. "We do not want your beef," Tala said in English, startling Dawes. "We want the promise that when the train comes, it does not bring more soldiers. We want the promise that the graves on the southern ridge will not be disturbed." Dawes looked at Tala, realizing for the first time that the man across from him was not merely a warrior, but a statesman forged in necessity. "You have that promise," Dawes said solemnly. "The garrison at Fort Redemption is being reduced. It will be a supply depot, not a base of operations. The war is over. Tala Rook." Tala looked at the paper, then at the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip. "The war on guns is over," he said. "The war of living together begins." He reached out and touched the paper. He did not sign it that was for the chief, but his touch was an acceptance. It was a compromise made of blood and necessity. The signing of the treaty did not bring immediate peace to the camp. It caused a fracture. That evening, as the fires were lit, the tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. Not everyone agreed with Tala's decision to negotiate. There were those who believed they should have fought to the last man, that living beside the railroad was a slow death worse than a bullet. Rowan was walking toward the creek to fetch water when a group of young warriors blocked her path. Leading them was a young man named Stonehand, whose brother had been wounded by the artillery. "Why are you still here, mapmaker?" Stonehand demanded. He spoke in his own tongue, but his meaning was clear in the aggressive set of his shoulders. Rowan stopped, setting her bucket down. "I am here because Nawa asked me to help with the tanning." "You help us into the grave," Stonehand spat. He pointed at her accusingly. "It was your drawing that brought the big guns. It was your marks on the paper that showed the one-armed wolf where to aim. You are a spy. A witch who smiles while she draws our death." Other voices joined in, a chorus of grief seeking a target. Rowan stood her ground, though her hands trembled. She understood their anger. She was the visible face of the invasion. "I did not know," Rowan said, her voice steady despite her fear. "When I drew those maps, I did not know how they would be used." "Ignorance is not innocence," Stonehand shouted. Stepping closer, he reached for the knife at his belt. "Enough!" The voice cracked like a whip. Nawa emerged from the shadows of the lodges, her small frame radiating a fury that made the young warriors step back. She held her digging stick like a war club. "You speak to her with the tongue of a fool," Nawa scolded Stonehand. "If it were not for her map, the true map, your mother would be weeping over your body in the canyon right now. Who showed us the tunnel? Who led the women through the dark when the soldiers came? Was it you?" Stonehand, no. "You were running. She was leading." "She is white," Stonehand argued, though his confidence wavered. "She belongs to them. She belongs to the truth," Nawa said. She moved to stand beside Rowan, placing a protective hand on the younger woman's shoulder. Rowan looked at the circle of hostile faces. She realized that Nawa's protection was not enough. She had to claim her own place here. She had to strip away the last secrets. "He is right," Rowan said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. She switched to English, then back to the Comanche phrases she had mastered, bridging the gap. "I did draw the maps for the army. I came here to do a job. I thought you were monsters because that is what I was told." She took a breath, her hand going to the silver necklace hidden beneath her dress, the one she had retrieved from her belongings. She pulled it out, letting the silver feather catch the firelight. "My father was Silas Mercer," she said. A murmur of recognition went through the older warriors. "He told me he killed a Comanche to get this feather. He told me it was a trophy." She looked directly at Stonehand, then turned her eyes to where Tala was standing at the edge of the circle, watching. "But he lied," Rowan continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "This feather belonged to a boy who pulled me from a burning wagon 15 years ago. A boy who saved the life of his enemy's daughter because he had honor." She pointed at Tala. "He saved me then, and I saved him in the canyon. We are not bound by blood, but we are bound by life. I sent the letter to the commissioner. I gave the testimony that put chains on Briggs. I am not your enemy. I am the one who chose to stand between you and the gun." Silence descended on the camp. It was a heavy, thoughtful silence. The revelation of the feather, the connection to Tala, shifted the narrative. She was no longer just the mapmaker. She was a piece of their own history returned to them. Stonehand looked at the silver feather, then at Tala, who nodded once, confirming the story. The young warrior lowered his head. He did not apologize, that was not the way, but he stepped aside, leaving the path to the creek open. "Go," Nawa said softly to Rowan. "The water waits." Tala did not come to her that night, nor the next. He was everywhere, working with a frantic energy. He helped rebuild the lodges. He broke new horses. He rode out with the scouts to ensure the army was truly retreating to the designated perimeter. But he avoided Rowan. Whenever their paths crossed, he would nod, his face a polite mask, and find a reason to move on. It was a maddening, aching distance. Rowan felt it like a physical coldness. They had shared the intimacy of the cave, the heat of the battle, the shared breath of survival. Now, he was building a wall between them stone by stone. Rowan watched him from the entrance of Nawa's lodge. She saw him standing by the corral, looking at the moon, his posture slumped with a weight she couldn't name. "He fights a harder battle now," Nawa observed, sitting beside Rowan with a basket of corn. "He is pushing me away," Rowan said, hugging her knees. "He thinks. I do not know what he thinks. Maybe he regrets saving me." "He regrets nothing," Nawa said, shelling a cob of corn with swift, efficient movements. "He is afraid. A man who fights a bear is brave. A man who holds a bird is afraid. He is afraid he will crush you, or that the cage he offers is too small. I am not a bird, Rowan said fiercely. Then stop waiting for him to open the door. Nawa snapped, though her eyes were kind. You are the mapmaker. Find the path to him. The next morning, Commissioner Dawes found Rowan near the river, where she was washing the soot from her spare dress. Miss Mercer, Dawes said, tipping his hat. I have a proposition for you. He handed her an official-looking envelope. The survey office in Santa Fe is in need of a senior cartographer. Your work on the valley floor was exceptional, despite the circumstances. Rowan dried her hands on her apron and took the letter. The offer was staggering. The salary was 3 times what she had made at the fort. It included a stipend for housing. It is a growing city, Dawes said, painting the picture. Stone buildings, opera houses, schools, a place where a woman of your talents would be celebrated. Not complicated. He looked around the camp, at the dust and the hides. You have done your duty here. Rowan, you helped secure the peace. No one would blame you for wanting to return to civilization. In fact, for your own safety, it might be best. The frontier is unforgiving to a woman alone. Rowan looked at the letter. It was everything she had wanted 6 months ago. Safety, respect, the means to buy her bookstore, not in a dusty outpost, but in a real city. She could sleep in a bed with linen sheets. She could walk down the street without fear of artillery. I need an answer by tomorrow, Dawes said. We ride out at dawn. Rowan spent the afternoon walking the perimeter of the valley. She held the letter in her pocket like a burning coal. She looked at the red cliffs, now scarred by cannon fire. She looked at the creek where she had hidden from the storm with Tala. She found Tala near the horse line, repairing a section of fence that had been trampled during the raid. He was shirtless, his back glistening with sweat, the muscles moving rhythmically as he hammered a post into the earth. He stopped when he sensed her approach. He didn't turn around immediately. He leaned against the post, taking a long breath. The commissioner says you are leaving, Tala said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He offered me a job, Rowan corrected. In Santa Fe. It is a good place, Tala said, finally turning to face her. Stone houses, high walls, safe. Is that what you want? Rowan asked, stepping closer. For me to be safe. I want you to be alive, Tala said roughly. I want you to be where people do not look at you with hate because you stood next to a savage. Stop it, Rowan said. Stop calling yourself that. It is what the world sees, Tala said. He gestured to the land around them. Look at this. Rowan, this is a hard life. We have less land now. The buffalo are thinning. The winter will be cold. Why would you stay? Because you feel you owe me for the fire. No, Rowan said. Because you feel guilty for the map. No. Then go, Tala said, turning back to the fence. Go to Santa Fe. Find a man who wears a suit and has 2 hands to hold you. Be happy. Rowan stared at his broad back, fury rising in her chest. He was making the decision for her. He was being noble, and it was infuriating. You think I am here because I am trapped? Rowan asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think I am some fragile thing that needs to be released? She switched to Comanche, the words she had practiced in her head 100 times. Ha, UVI, she said. You fool. Tala froze. He turned slowly. Rowan stepped into his space, forcing him to look down at her. You think you are the only one who lost things I lost my father to this war. I lost my name at the fort. I was invisible until I came here. Until I met you. She poked him in the chest, right over his heart. You are scared. You are scared because you lost your brother, and you lost your land, and now you are terrified to want anything else because you think the Great Spirit will take it away. Tala caught her hand. His grip was hard. Yes, he hissed, the mask cracking. Yes, I'm afraid. Do you know what it does to a man to lose everything he loves? I look at you, and I see the only light left in this valley. And if I ask you to stay, and the winter takes you, or the fever, or a stray bullet. It will kill me. Rowan, it will finish what Briggs started. His eyes were wet, shining with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. I can survive the war. I cannot survive watching you die by inches in this dust. Rowan softened. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumbs brushing the high cheekbones. Then don't watch me die, she whispered. Watch me live. I am not asking for a stone house. I am asking for a home. She looked deep into his eyes. In Santa Fe, I would be safe, but I would wake up every night listening for a black horse. I would look at the moon and wonder if the man who saved me was cold. I would be a ghost in my own life. Tala closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. A shudder went through him. The surrender of a man who had fought a siege and finally opened the gates. You are stubborn, he murmured. I am a mercer, she replied. We hold our ground. The next morning, the mist hung low over the river. The commissioner's wagon was packed and ready. Dawes stood by the wheel, checking his watch. Miss Mercer, he called out. We are burning daylight. Rowan walked out of Nawa's lodge. She was not wearing the travel suit she had arrived in. She was wearing a dress of soft doe skin, dyed a deep russet, with a belt of woven beads. But over it, she wore her cartographer's satchel, the leather worn and familiar. She walked to the wagon. She handed the envelope back to Dawes. Thank you, Commissioner, Rowan said, but the position is not for me. Dawes looked at her, then at the camp behind her. He saw the children playing near the creek. He saw the fresh timber being cut for a new structure, a schoolhouse, perhaps, and he saw Tala Rook standing by his horse, watching. Dawes smiled, a genuine, if slightly perplexed, expression. You are making a difficult choice, my dear. I'm making a necessary one, Rowan said. Someone has to draw the line so they don't get crossed again. Someone has to teach the children that the world is big enough for both languages. Dawes nodded. He tipped his hat. Good luck. Rowan, I suspect we will be seeing your maps again. You will, she promised. But this time, they will show the way home. She watched the wagon roll away, the wheels crunching on the gravel, disappearing toward the east where the railroad tracks glinted in the sun. Rowan turned back to the valley. It was not a paradise. It was scarred, dusty, and hard. But it was hers. That night, the moon was full, bathing the valley in silver light. Rowan sat in her lodge, her own lodge now, erected near Nawa's, sorting through her pencils and paper. A scratch came at the lodge pole. The traditional request for entry? Enter, Rowan said. Tala ducked inside. He filled the small space with his presence. He wore a fresh shirt, clean buckskin, and his hair was braided with care. He did not speak immediately. He knelt across the small fire from her. He reached into his pouch and pulled out something. It was a leather band, simple and strong, braided from the hide of the buffalo. Attached to it was a single, glossy black feather. Not silver, real, alive. In the old way, Tala said, his voice husky. A man brings horses to the father of the woman he chooses. Rowan smiled. I have no father to accept them. I know, Tala said. So I bring this to you. He held out the bracelet. The silver feather was a memory of a life saved in the past. This feather is a promise for the life we live now. I give this to you while I stand, while I breathe. No more ghosts. Rowan reached out. Her hand was steady. Put it on me. Tala tied the leather band around her wrist. His fingers lingered on her pulse, feeling the steady rhythm of her life. Rowan reached to her neck and unclasped the silver pendant, the cold metal that had rested against her heart for 15 years. She held it out to him. And I give this to you, she said. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that you were never a savage. You were always the man who saved me. Tala took the silver feather. He closed his hand around it, then brought her hand to his lips. Darlin, he whispered. The English word no longer a tease, but a prayer. You stay? I stay, Rowan confirmed. He moved around the fire then, closing the distance. He pulled her into his arms, not with the desperation of the cave, but with the deliberate, claiming slow burn of a man who knew he had a lifetime to love her. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Far in the distance, a train whistle blew a lonely, high sound. But in the lodge, there was only the warmth of the fire and the silence of two worlds finally, perfectly, colliding. 3 years had passed since the cannons fell silent in the valley, and the world had changed in ways both loud and quiet. To the south, the Iron Horse had finally come. It did not tear through the heart of the camp as Colonel Briggs had once threatened, but it skirted the edge of the territory, a ribbon of steel glinting in the hard sun. The sound of its whistle, once a shriek of impending doom, had become a rhythmic part of the landscape, as regular as the coyote's howl or the thunder of summer storms. It was the sound of a clock ticking, marking a time that moved only forward, never back. The Comanche camp still stood in the valley, though it had shifted slightly, moving closer to the water and the timber. It was a place of transition. On trading days, young warriors rode down to the rail depot, their ponies laden with tanned buffalo hides and intricate beadwork, returning with sacks of coffee, bolts of calico, and steel tools. They rode with a wariness that had not faded, but their quivers were often filled with arrows for game, not for soldiers. Rowan Mercer stood beneath the sprawling shade of a giant cottonwood tree near the creek. The air was filled with the sound of children's voices, a chaotic, beautiful melody of two languages clashing and blending. "Pasan," a little girl named Morningstar said, holding up a smooth river stone. "Good," Rowan nodded, smiling. "And in English?" "Snake," the girl chirped, giggling as she dropped the stone which she had painted with a zigzag line. "Snake," repeated a boy with freckles and straw-colored hair, the son of a Swedish immigrant who worked at the watering station. He looked at Morningstar with wide eyes, then tried the Comanche word, pa-san. Rowan's schoolhouse had no walls. It was defined only by the circle of stones she had laid out and the chalkboard she had paid to have shipped all the way from St. Louis. It was not a government school. Those were places where they cut hair and forbade the old tongue. This was Rowan's school. Here, the children of the tribe and the children of the section gangs learned that sky and Tommu were the same blue roof over their heads. She walked to her desk. A simple crate turned on its side and picked up a map. It was one of her new works. It was precise. The elevation lines drawn with the skill of a master surveyor, but the labels told a different story. Beside the English name Chimney Rock, she had inked the Comanche name The Giant's Finger. Beside the blue line of the river, she had written the legend of the water spirits. She was no longer drawing targets. She was drawing memories. She was ensuring that even if the world paved over the grass, the names of the things that lived here would remain. A shadow fell across her desk. "Teacher," a deep voice rumbled. "The sun is high. The bellies are empty." Rowan looked up, squinting against the glare. Tala Rook sat on a sturdy bay gelding, looking down at her. The years had etched new lines around his eyes, and silver had begun to touch the temples of his raven hair. But he sat as straight as a lance. He wore a mixture of the old ways and the new buckskin leggings, but a cotton shirt unbuttoned at the throat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. "The lesson is not finished," Rowan teased, though her heart gave that familiar, traitorous leap it always did when she saw him. "The lesson is always finished when the stew is ready," Tala countered, a slow smile touching his lips. He dismounted with a fluid grace. He was known now along the rail line, not as the ghost who raided supply trains, but as the guide. When the railroad executives or the peace commissioners needed to survey the far passes, they hired Tala. He ensured they did not trample on sacred ground. He ensured they did not get lost in the canyons. He took their money gold coin only, but he refused their accolades. There was a story told in the saloons of the depot about a general who had tried to pin a medal on Tala's chest for saving a survey team from a flash flood. Tala had looked at the medal, looked at the general, and said, "I do not wear the tin of the men who burned my brother's lodge." He had taken a pouch of good tobacco instead and ridden away. "Did you find them?" Rowan asked, walking to him. "I found them," Tala said. He had been gone for 4 days, guiding a group of German botanists who wanted to paint the desert cacti. They looked at thorns for 3 days. They did not shoot anything. They were strange men, but harmless. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His hand was rough, calloused from reins and rope, but his touch was gentle. "I missed the map maker. I am right here," she whispered, leaning into his hand for a brief second before the children noticed. Their home sat on a rise of land between the camp and the creek. It was not a teepee, nor was it a frame house like those in the east. It was a cabin of peeled pine logs, chinked with river clay, squat and solid against the wind. It faced east, toward the sunrise, as was the custom of his people. But it had glass windows that looked south toward the train tracks, as was the custom of hers. Inside, the cabin was a testament to the life they had built from the wreckage of the war. A large table, hewn from oak and sanded smooth by Tala's own hands, dominated the room. It was where they ate, where Rowan drew, and where the tribal elders sometimes sat to drink coffee and discuss the price of beef. On the walls, pinned alongside Rowan's detailed topographical maps, were crude, joyful drawings in charcoal and berry juice, a horse with 5 legs, a steam engine that looked like a caterpillar, a black feather. In the corner, near the stone hearth, stood a wooden cradle. Rowan entered the cabin, wiping the chalk dust from her hands. The smell of baking cornbread filled the air, warm and sweet. She went to the cradle. Inside, sleeping with one arm thrown over his head, was a boy of 2 winters. His hair was a chaotic mop of black curls, but his skin was the color of roasted almonds, lighter than his father's, darker than hers. Tala came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood there in silence, watching the rise and fall of the child's chest. "He sleeps like you," Tala murmured, "fighting invisible battles." "He sleeps like you," Rowan corrected softly. "Snoring?" Tala chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "I do not snore. I dream out loud." The boy, awakened by their voices, stirred. He opened his eyes the color of wet earth, dark brown with flecks of gold. He sat up, clutching 2 things in his small fists. In his left hand, a wooden horse Tala had carved. In his right, a stuffed calico cat Rowan had sewn. "Happy you," the boy said sleepily. Reaching for Tala, "Father." Tala lifted him effortlessly, holding the boy against his chest. "Hello, little wolf. Did you conquer the cat today?" "Cat bite," the boy said solemnly, pointing to the stuffed toy. "Then bite it back," Tala advised. Rowan laughed, turning to check the oven. "Do not teach him to bite the furniture. Tala, he is wild enough." "He is a bridge," Tala said, kissing the top of the boy's head. "He needs to be strong enough to let people walk on him, and wild enough to throw them off if they stay too long." It was a joke, but Rowan heard the undercurrent of seriousness. The world outside their door was peaceful for now, but it was not perfect. There were still whispers in the settlement near the depot, men who spat when Rowan walked by, muttering "Indian lover" under their breath. There were young warriors in the camp who still looked at Tala with suspicion, calling him the railroad's dog because he kept the peace instead of the warpath. But every year that passed without a massacre, the arguments grew thinner. The hateful voices became background noise, drowned out by the reality of survival. Rowan and Tala had not changed the world, but they had carved out a space in it where love was not a political act, but a daily bread. Dinner was a simple affair, hot cornbread with honey, and a large trout Tala had speared in the high streams. They ate at the oak table, the oil lamp casting a warm, golden circle of light against the encroaching dark. "The commissioner sent a letter," Rowan said, breaking a piece of bread. "He says the survey for the northern spur is complete. They are going around Spirit Rock, not through it." Tala nodded, picking a bone from his fish. "Good. If they had tried to blast that rock, The mountain lion spirits would have eaten their engineers, or you would have cut their saddle girths in the night, Rowan noted dryly. Tala feigned innocence. I am a man of peace. Rowan, I do not vandalize property. You filled the surveyor's boots with scorpions last month, she reminded him. They were desert scorpions. Tala said with a shrug. They were just looking for warmth. It is not my fault the boots were occupied. Rowan shook her head, hiding a smile. He had not lost his edge. He had just learned to use it with more precision. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the chinking of the logs. It was the same wind that had once trapped them in the cave, the same wind that had carried the smoke of the burning wagons. But tonight, it was just the wind. After the meal, they sat on the porch for a while, as they often did. The baby was asleep in the cradle. The valley was bathed in starlight. Far to the south, the faint, lonesome wail of a train whistle drifted on the breeze. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, watching Tala whittle a piece of cedar. Do you ever miss it? She asked suddenly. Miss what? Tala asked, not looking up from his knife. The silence, she said. Before the train, before me, when it was just you and the land. Tala stopped cutting. He looked out at the dark shapes of the mountains. I remember the silence, he said quietly. It was loud. It was filled with the ghosts of everyone I had lost. It was cold. He turned to look at her. I do not miss the cold. Rowan, I prefer the noise of the school. I prefer the train, if it brings the coffee you like, and I prefer the woman who talks too much about alphabets. Rowan smiled, her throat tight. I do not talk too much. You talk in your sleep, Tala said, standing up and closing his knife. Come, the fire is dying. Inside, the cabin was cooling as the night deepened. Rowan added a log to the hearth, stirring the embers until they glowed orange. Tala sat on the edge of the bed, a frame of willow wood covered with thick furs and a quilt Rowan had bought from the catalog. He winced slightly as he pulled his shirt off. Rowan saw the flinch. She knew the weather was changing. The dampness always settled in his old wounds, the scar on his left shoulder, where the bullet had gone through in the box canyon, was a puckered knot of tissue, a permanent reminder of the day he had chosen her over revenge. She went to the shelf and took down a jar of salve. She made herself bear grease mixed with arnica and sage. Sit still, she commanded softly. Tala obeyed, resting his hands on his knees. The firelight played over the bronze skin of his back, highlighting the map of scars that told the history of his life. Rowan stood behind him. She scooped a bit of the salve onto her fingers. She touched his shoulder. The skin was warm, the muscle beneath it tense. As she began to massage the ointment into the scar tissue, she felt him exhale, a long, ragged breath of relief. She worked in silence for a moment, her thumbs kneading the stiffness away. Then, her hands drifted. She wasn't just tending the wound anymore. She was memorizing the man. Her fingers traced the line of his spine, the hard curve of his shoulder blade. She moved around to stand in front of him. He looked up at her, his eyes dark and heavy-lidded. Rowan reached out to the waistband of his buckskin trousers. There were buttons there, made of antler. The wound is on my shoulder. Mapmaker, Tala murmured, though he made no move to stop her. The medicine needs to circulate, Rowan whispered, her voice husky. It is a holistic treatment. She undid the first button, then the second. Her knuckles grazed the flat plane of his stomach. Tala's hands came up to grip her hips, his thumbs pressing into the fabric of her dress. His head fell back slightly, exposing the strong column of his throat. You play a dangerous game, he groaned, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. Rowan undid the third button. She leaned in, pressing a kiss to the scar on his chest, right over his heart. I am not playing, she said against his skin. Tala shuddered. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of flower and wildflowers that was uniquely hers. Darlin, he whispered, the word rough with a mixture of desire and a profound, aching tenderness. If you keep touching me like that, I will never redeem myself with my gods. They will say I traded paradise for a woman's hands." Rowan pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. She smiled, a slow, secret smile that belonged only to him. "Then let them say it," she whispered. "We make our own paradise here." He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, blood-flavored kiss of the cave. It was the kiss of a husband, a lover, a partner. It tasted of smoke and honey, and the peace they had fought the whole world to keep. Later, much later, when the fire had burned down to embers, Rowan stepped out of the cabin alone. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. She walked to the edge of the rise and looked out. To the west, a pack of coyotes was yipping at the moon, a chaotic song of the wild. To the south, the headlight of a late train cut a beam through the darkness, a straight, unwavering line of industry. The west was not tame. It never would be. There were still rattlesnakes under the rocks and men with hate in their hearts in the towns. The treaty was just paper. It could burn. The peace was fragile. It could break. But as she looked back at the cabin, she saw the soft glow of the lamp in the window. She saw the silhouette of Tala, who had risen to rock the cradle because the baby had stirred. Rowan Mercer realized she was no longer looking for a place to fit in. She had built one. She had come west to draw maps, to define the world by lines and borders. But she had learned that the only geography that mattered was the space between two people who refused to let go. Freedom, she thought as she watched a shooting star streak across the vast, indifferent sky, was not about riding into the sunset alone. True freedom was the courage to bind yourself to another, to undo the buttons of your armor, and to say, "I am here, I stay." She turned and walked back toward the light, toward the man and the child who were waiting for her. The door closed against the wind, shutting out the cold, leaving only the warmth within. The end author's note. Thank you, dear reader, for riding this trail with me all the way from the dusty gates of Fort Redemption to the quiet warmth of that cabin. It has been a long journey through the canyon, hasn't it? I would love to know where you are listening to or reading this story from. Are you sitting on a porch in Texas, riding a subway in New York, or somewhere far across the ocean? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Rowan and Tala's journey. Did they find the redemption they were looking for? If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like. And if you really felt the spirit of the frontier, hit that hype button to help this story reach more travelers on the trail. Your support helps keep the campfire burning and the stories flowing. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.